Okay. Still scuffed. That is super unfortunate. That is not like me. Okay. Yeah, I'm early for once. You're actually late. We're just having some scuffed problems. Okay, it looks better on YouTube. But Kick. Kick is always perfect. My wonderful little... Okay, I think we're fixed up. I'm gonna try playing something for a little bit, and then we'll see where we're at, okay? Beep, beep.
My cat Uno is not a therapy cat.
What's this cat name?
Uno.
Oh, this is Uno, Mom.
Yeah.
This is not my
Drop,
new friend.
drop frame rate is good.
Hug.
But after this interaction, I think I'm going to start the certification process.
Mom, you want pet too, Mom?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh,
Hi, Mom.
he's so soft.
That was the cat box.
You do walk a cat.
He's so cute, Mom. This cat is so cute.
Hear that, Uno? You're cute. We need another kid to
Thanks for the sub! Appreciate it. Muy appreciated.
walk a cat. Uno, look at you go.
And these bugs, Mom, these are so cutie pie.
I've never heard a child say cutie pie.
We gotta go inside, baby. Can you say goodbye?
This is my new friend.
Say goodnight.
Is your little friend?
Tail.
Say I'll see you around.
Okay.
Okay.
Say goodnight. Say goodnight, Uno.
Say goodnight, baby.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
I'm sure you'll see him again.
Yeah, I
Oh my gosh, she's so cute. No. Oh. How is he not reacting? He must have music in or something.
So meanwhile,
This is
Oh no, that's loud as all hell.
such a wild story. So yesterday, news broke that a US soldier willingly and without authorization
All right, I
crossed
think we're
into
good.
North Korea, making him the first US soldier to do so since 1982. The reason why is where this just gets strange. 23-year-old Travis King joined the military in January 2021 and was recently put on rotation in South Korea. But it's reported that he'd actually been in Korean jail for the past 2 months on assault charges after he punched a Korean nationalist in the face at a nightclub and was fined 5 million won for repeatedly kicking the back door of a police car and screaming foul language at the officers trying to apprehend him. Now, after his release, he was escorted to the airport to go back to the United States where he would face disciplinary action. But he somehow managed to not board the plane. It was reported that since military police officers were not allowed to accompany him all the way up to the plane, right before boarding, he told the airline staff that he had lost his passport. So they were forced to escort him out of the departure area. Now, this guy must have some way with words, because he then managed to somehow join a civilian tour group, leaving from the airport to the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. But according to the BBC, it usually takes 3 days for an individual to be authorized on one of these trips. And apparently they are very closely monitored. Either way, while he was on his tour, an eyewitness said that he let out a massive laugh and then sprinted into North Korea. He's believed to now be in custody. And as a US soldier and citizen, it potentially gives North Korea a powerful bargaining chip. So the question is, do you think he was simply running from punishment? Or is there something we're missing here?
I am so confused by that story.
is such a wild story. So yesterday, news broke that a US soldier willingly and without authorization crossed into North Korea, making him the first US soldier to do so since 1982. The reason why is where this just gets strange. 23-year-old...
Okay, so we have no idea why he's there. Great. 10 out of 10. Cute the way your mouth hangs open. Like that. That just did something. Did you feel a little tickle? Tickle in your tummy? Alright, let's see if my... Alright! I have a guest coming up. I'm excited. Let's see if this camera's ready. Yes. I'm excited to share him all with you. To share him all with you. That's a sentence. I'm excited to share him with you guys. He works at the Israel-Palestine border. He's an expert there. He's an anthropologist. He's been involved in kind of like helping out in the services. It's not super clear to me precisely what his role is, but he's kind of well-versed, hi Casey, in the Israel-Palestine conflict and what's going on. So we're going to talk to him here. If you have questions, I'm trying to think. Maybe what I'll do, I don't really want the alerts on, but I also don't not want the alerts on. You know, you feel... Let's see if I can maybe silence the alerts. There's gotta be an advanced, yeah. Oh, no way. Did I just figure something out? Oh my pog. What the fuck? Hold on. This is crazy. Okay, anyways, that's not a solution to this problem, though. What do you guys think? Should I just turn off the alerts completely? Or... I'm not sure. We'll see how we do. If the alerts get really annoying, I'll turn them off. How about that? Okay? We'll leave them on for now. I'll ask him if he doesn't mind like pausing for alerts, and then if they're really annoying, I'll pause it. So if you want to send in a question, I have a bunch of stuff that I've already collected, but if you have specific questions that you would like to ask, please let me know. And I will do my best to ask those questions. And obviously, if you send in a question that's paid for, I will most likely cover it unless it's super inappropriate. And you're clearly trolling, and then thanks for the money, but also get fucked. Yeah. We'll leave them on for now, in case they're not too insane, because it's just really annoying for me to turn them off and on with this new setup. So because they don't pause properly, ever. Stream Elements has like the pause alert system. It's never worked for me, so I don't know. I don't know, man. None of these technologies work as promised. Just read $50 donations like FNF. True. If you want your donations to be read, you have to send in a minimum of $50. Imagine. Okay, I'm going to pause the alerts. I've got the alerts pulled open, but no guarantee that this will work. So, it is what it is. And I'll try pausing the Twitch alerts as well. And Kick, your poor souls are not yet integrated, so it doesn't matter. Kick does not have a clear pause thing. Activity feed. Skip. How we doing? Prime. Okay, and the ornate. Okay. All right. Let's do this.
Ah, wrong camera. Hey,
Hello.
is
Super anonymous. Oh my gosh.
there we go.
That's
There
better.
it is. What's up?
Hello, how's it going?
Good. It's Friday. It feels like it.
Yeah, it is Friday. Wait,
It
it
is
is.
Friday.
Yeah, okay, it is. I was like, wait, isn't it Friday?
It doesn't always feel like it to me
That's true.
today.
That's true.
Because
It's super nice to meet you.
yeah.
Yeah, it's we've been set up through a mutual friend. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, what we should call you, and what we're going to talk about today?
What should you call me? You can call me Aaron. Yeah, my name's Aaron Pina. I use he, him pronouns. I am calling you from Portland. Lived here for off and on years. Originally from Rhode Island. Um, let's see, I worked in the State Department for about 12 years as a Middle East human rights guy, and that's where I sort of got into Middle East issues, Israel and Palestine, though my connection goes back a bit before that. We can talk about that later. And yeah, I thought it'd be great to talk about Israel Palestine writ large, the US role in that.
Yeah.
We talk about human rights, peace process, sort of putting what's going on now in a broader context to just like have a good chit chat on Israel Palestine.
Nice. Okay. So
It's not
maybe start us with like the baby basics. What is Israel Palestine? Why are these two nations, nation states interacting? Like start us from like the very beginning so that people kind of have context for all of this. Assume we
yeah.
know nothing.
Okay. So you have one nation state, Israel, and then you have a nation without a state that more and more people will call Palestine. That's the historic name. Israel is a term that will not change unless we're talking about Israel proper, and I'll get into that. And if I start to get tangity on you or go too long, just like interrupt. So those are the two parties. Up until 1947, the area that you and I and other folks who look at a map, what we call Israel and Palestine, there was no such thing in 1947 except for Palestine. That area that would become Israel in 1948, up until 1948, that area that we call historic Palestine, should have brought my maps today. Serious, I like totally forgot my maps. Was actually under British control. So at the close of World War II, Palestine was carved up and given to Western powers. This racist idea that people in the Middle East, though newly free, do not know how to control themselves or govern themselves. And so between World War I and World War II, Western European powers were considered the mandates.
Okay.
And so the British, the French, the Germans, the Russians all had mandate powers in the Middle East. So France was the power for Lebanon and Syria, which is why you have so many French-speaking folks in Lebanon and Syria.
Just a question. I sent you a map. Does this map look like something? Because I don't want to put something on screen if it's not relevant. Does this map show a good trajectory of like how the borders changed over time?
Yeah, that's like a standard issue fun image. Yeah,
Okay,
let's
pull it
put
up on screen.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, keep going. So we
It's
have
so,
Palestine, 1946. Israel gets carved out in 1947, and then there's. Sorry?
1948, Israel becomes a country.
Okay.
Prior to 48, what you're looking at now was called Palestine. From 1947 back to the 16th century under the Ottoman Empire.
Okay.
So let's call it, a good 400 or 500 years. It was called Palestine.
Yeah.
That is something I'm very clear about. Many people believe that there's no such thing as Palestine. That's not true. So the British government controlled that part of the world for better or worse, and up until the 40s, the British government tended to side with Palestinians. Like they agreed this was Palestine. The British limited Jewish immigration into Palestine. They favored the Palestinian cause. Towards the end of the 40s, the British shifted their view and started to support the World Zionist Organization, which is a political body that tried to create the state, the political body maybe 100 years.
Okay.
So with a little bit of British support, Zionists, there are no Israelis at this moment, Zionists, which are mostly Jews who are politically active to create a homeland. That's what Zionism is.
Right. Okay.
Zionists wanted to create this country. The Brits were not moving fast enough. So Jewish militants started attacking the Brits in the 40s. This is called the Stern Gang or the Irgun, one of the earliest examples of political terror we have in the region. That forced the British out of the country. There was no major power to keep the peace. The US had no desire to get in there. And so the power with the most guns, with the most organization, was able to win. And those were those Zionists. And so in 48, which is the Day of Independence in Israel, and in Palestine, it's called Al-Nakba, which means the catastrophe. And so in 1948, Zionists and some supporters from Germany created a really violent atmosphere in Palestine and ejected Palestinians from their homes, many of whom still carry the keys to their homes that they lost in 1948. That war, if you want to call it a war, between not yet formed Israel government and all these Palestinian factions, which were based on families pretty much, that fight created Israel, and it created at the time one of the largest humanitarian and refugee crises ever. So over 1 million Palestinians either fled or were kicked out of their homes and pushed out of that area called Palestine into what we now call Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, where many remain to this day in refugee camps. That's the creation of the State of Israel. As soon as the State of Israel is created in 48 and declared an independent state, the U.S. is the first government to recognize the State of Israel in the UN. The UN declares that while the State of Israel may be a legitimate creation, the land it's on is an illegal activity. So under international law, the way Israel was created is a violation and quite problematic.
Okay. Because it's just like a stealing of the land and a thrusting of people out of it, or what specifically is the legal issue?
The creation of it's problematic because it actually belonged to either Egypt or Britain. That's one area where, like, wait a minute, this was supposed to be transferred to Arab leadership. Like, that was the plan.
Right.
Was at some point in time, Arab leaders would be able to inherit this land from the Brits, called Palestine. As soon as the Brits were satisfied that whoever's in charge would allow them access through the Middle East to get to India, which is their big imperial concern. Between 48 and 1967, the UN they go back and forth. There are times when they say this is a nation born like any other nation. It's often contested. It's often bloody. Other times you would say, no, this is an illegal creation. We don't sanction this. But it's an accomplished feat. It's a fait accompli. It's a reality on the ground. This is something you hear a lot in this part of the world, are facts on the ground. You may have the law, but we have facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground are that this is a state, it's majority Jewish. They're getting more and more armed and they're moving out Arab populations. The real problem when it comes to legality happens in 1967.
Okay.
So look at your map there. 1947, as a last-ditch effort, the UN's like, okay, y'all, The British are going to leave. Let's just divide this up between the two of you. So the green zone would be Palestine. That white area would be Israel. The Arabs said yes. The Jews said yes. Then the Arabs said no. And the Jews says yes. I'm being very general here. We want to talk names, we can, but that's basically the debate. Both parties agreed to the partition. Then the Arab leadership side said no, thank you. The Jewish Israeli side said this sounds great.
And I'm just confirming the Arab leadership represents the Palestinians, I'm assuming.
Palestinians, Egyptians, Jordanians,
wherever they've been displaced to.
Lebanese.
So was it like a coalition between these three countries, or where, like, who were these specific leaders, since Palestine obviously isn't really a nation now?
It's a nation, not a state.
Yeah, sorry, it's not a nation state. So there isn't like a president of the Palestine
Not
at this
then.
time.
Yeah, no, there's no formal political leadership. There are clans, there are families, leading families who have been the political elite for decades. Think of the Bushes, for instance, or the Clintons. A political dynasty that might stretch back 100 or 200 years. They tend to be the richer Palestinian families. Some Palestinians, before all this drama happened, they left in the 30s and moved to Egypt, what we call Lebanon and Syria. Those folks became leaders in those countries. They would come back to support the Palestinian cause.
Okay.
There is also a bunch of like global Muslim and Christian leaders. And so there's a position called the Mufti of Jerusalem, and the Mufti is the top Muslim official in the Holy Land. So pretty big leader.
Right.
Like they would be one of the leaders for the Palestinian cause. But your question highlights part of the challenge for Palestinians, even today, which is a pretty weak, non-consensus government. The leaders have no support from the people. They're always viewed as corrupt and ineffective. And it's been that way since the 40s.
The Palestinian leaders specifically?
Yeah,
By
Palestinians.
Palestinian people, they view their own leaders as problematic?
And always have.
Okay.
If you look at any poll since the 70s, Palestinians, by and large, have never really supported their leaders. They've never felt very led, especially since the 90s. Something like 60% of Palestinians now believe that their leaders are actually no more than the jailers for Israel. That's how bad the view on leadership has gotten.
Okay.
So on the eve of this partition plan, the Brits are getting ready to leave. They don't want to, not yet, but they can't keep taking these attacks and sending dead Englishmen home for no reason. So they're leaving. UN wants to divide it. When the Brits leave, elements of these Zionists, soon-to-be Israelis, crossed those lines that you see in the 47 block,
right,
and expanded the white into that central green area, which is the West Bank, and this green little sliver that touches the Mediterranean, that's the Gaza Strip.
Okay. Yep.
Just to give you context. So these almost Israeli Zionists poured into the West Bank, that's where Jerusalem is, ejected Palestinians, killed more. Those who stayed, you're not going to be part of Israel. That was deemed a violation by the UN. And under international law, no matter what anyone tells you, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are considered occupied territories under international law. They're not disputed. That's what American conservatives would like you to believe. There's nothing in dispute. It's quite clear. Israel has violated international law, and they have responsibility as an occupying power until such time that all this is sorted out.
So when you emphasize that, because I'm already seeing some like pushback, obviously in my chat as well, from some people. That is.
I would suspect so.
So when you say that it's like disputed, what are the arguments for why it's not? It's not a violation. It's not occupied land, and that.
Right.
Yeah.
The argument for those who believe this is disputed territory, there's multiple prongs of that argument, and it's a very big spectrum of those who support it. But generally speaking, people who talk about it being disputed are saying Israel has a longer claim to that land than Palestinians. So there's nothing to dispute. Open your Bible, and you will clearly see evidence going back 5,000 years, at least 5,000 years, that Jews have lived in Palestine. So there's no dispute. What they forget to say is there's Palestinians there too, and they're in the Bible too. But whatever. It's disputed because there's a claim already there, and we just need to sort out how we support or give money to or help to the Palestinians, but it's not illegal. The second part is that people who feel it's just disputed and not illegal, they have no love for international law or the UN. So when I say it's illegal, I'm saying it's illegal under established international human rights law, not US law, but what the UN says.
Okay. And so I'm guessing
that's why people would say it's not illegal. That's who cares about the UN? Israel has a longer claim.
okay. So I'm super curious because a lot of people are probably wondering like your background. Would you say that you fall like clearly strongly in the Palestinian side, or would you say that you don't really view it as a conflict of sides necessarily, that it's more complicated? I'm just curious like where you fall in this and also like your expertise behind this, just because I don't think we actually introduced that yet.
That's a hard question for me. Like I'm not trying to skirt it. Yeah, I think picking sides is what's gotten these folks to this point in the US. We keep picking winners and losers. I'm a radical centrist, okay? I'm not a liberal. I'm not a conservative. I don't belong to political parties. I'm not down with that bullshit. I do believe in international human rights. I do believe that there is sometimes very clear things that must be named for what it is, despite how challenging it may be. And I believe in letting justice be done, though heavens fall. And when I look at the situation, it's quite clear to me that you have like disproportionate power, first of all. And what's going on in Israel, Israel proper, not Palestine, but Israel, in my humble opinion, since the early 2000s, can best be classified as apartheid. I believe Israel is an apartheid state today, not too dissimilar to South Africa. Now, if I look at South Africa, did I hate the South Afrikaans government? Yeah, I hated that racist apartheid government. Had no problem with South Afrikaners. Did I love the African National Congress who supported Black liberation? Not really, because they were actually terrorists and used to blow up people, and I'm not down with that. But I do like that they were able to put down their guns and embrace a political process to end apartheid. So where do I fall? I fall on the side of human rights. That's where I fall. And I believe that Israel has a big responsibility to the international community because it is a nation state. Palestine has a responsibility as well when it comes to, stopping violence, stopping terrorism. But we got to understand it's not a nation. I'm sorry, it's not a state.
Right.
They don't have the capacity to control
They don't
and
have like a
govern.
military to go through and vet out terrorists and stuff like that.
That's by design. That was designed in the 90s to create a Palestine that looks like a state, but it has no functions of a state. So I fall on the side of human rights. I fall on the side of justice.
So
And
because there's an Arab coalition government or something for the Palestine, because you said that you made it sound like there are elected leaders for Palestine, which makes it
there hasn't been an election in Palestine since 2005.
okay.
All right.
So at least it's not a very overly democratic, but
no, it is not fair to say Palestine's a democracy. I also would say it's not fair to call Israel a democracy right now. And in the case of Palestine, Palestine has, unlike pretty much every other Middle East country, with the exception of Lebanon, Palestine has deep, centuries-long connections to democracy. Democracy in all of its forms is not foreign to Palestinians. Also, being right next door to Israel also has sort of rubbed off, if you will, democracy and democratic practices being that close to Israel. So, no, there have not been any elections in Palestine since 2005. And the current president, Mahmoud Abbas, was thought to be a reformer, but he's not, and he will probably never hold elections while he's alive because he doesn't want to lose power. There really is no government in Palestine. The only government that really exists is in the Gaza Strip, which is run by Hamas, which is a militant, depending who you ask, they're either freedom fighters or they're terrorists,
Right.
but they are violent, but they do govern Gaza, which is
Okay.
a prison, basically.
I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding this. So they do have a leader of sorts, which is a president, a boss. And they technically elected him, although the democratic question of that is quite large. So then how come Palestine, if it has a government and it has an official, at least in one area, and then there's Hamas on the other side, why is it not a nation state? Why can't it govern itself?
Oh, yeah. So they do have the organs of a state. They have a police. They're not very well functioning, but the following institutions are in Palestine and have been there since the 80s. They have a judiciary. They have courts. They're very well trained judges, actually. They have an education system that's actually quite good. They have a healthcare institution, which historically was quite good. They have an entire government. There's a parliament, right? Upper and lower chamber. They have a president. They have all the trappings of the state. They have a flag. They have some of their own money. They have their own uniforms. So ever since 1994 and the signing of the Oslo Peace Accords, Palestine, if you look on paper, it looks like a state. They have all the things a state you would expect a state to have. But they're not a state because to be a state means certain things. One, to be considered, there's 197 of these on the globe, right? So there are rules to this game of being a state. It's very clear who's in, who's out. If you're a state, you can control all of your borders. Palestine does not control its borders. Israel controls the borders. They create the checkpoints, they expand, they contract. They have no control over their borders. To be an effective nation state, you have to have a monopoly on violence, i.e., a military. You have to be able to have more guns than anyone else. They don't have that. They have a police force. They're not allowed to have a military based on the peace accords. So they have a police force, and that's it. And the police force is very constrained to what they can and cannot do. But ultimately, why are they not a nation state? Because Israel won't allow it to be so. Israel will not allow it to be a viable state. I think there are actors in the region. I'm thinking about Saudi, Turkey, Egypt, maybe Lebanon, who also do not want to see a healthy, viable Palestine. That's right. Many Arab countries do not want this to be resolved. They'd rather have the issue than have it be resolved. They'd rather raise money off of it. They'd rather bash Israel's anti-Semitism. They'd rather show themselves to be Arab heroes than actually solve it. So the world is against, most of the world is against there being a real viable, that's the word, viable state called Palestine. We had a moment, there was a window, about 10 years from the mid-90s to the mid-aughts, got really close to having what's called the two-state solution.
Right.
But it fell apart soon after 9/11 and our change in government and their change in government. And it's been dead ever since. I don't really think there is a two-state process anymore.
Do you think either side, like, would Palestine agree to the borders? Like, say Israel was like, here you go, you know what? We don't want to fuck with you anymore. You can have this spot and that's it. Do you think Palestine and like the leaders that are at least there would agree to this at this point? Or is it kind of like both sides are in like a no hold bar, like it's like all in or all out, basically?
Yeah, I think I think Palestinian leaders would say we've already said yes several times. And I think there is a way, if Israel, with the support of the US, wanted to actually have a viable peace process, they would, and they could present something viable. Most people understand what the solution looks like. The solution was created in 1948. The partition plan is the solution, and there are all these policies and projects besides boundaries that are part of some, ultimate reconciliation, including the right of return and, paying people compensation for losing their stuff and doing land swaps. The fact is Israel's borders are not going to change. They're not going to change. Israel proper, 1967 Israel, that's that block there. That's what most of us call Israel proper, meaning legal Israel. What you're looking at in 1967, the green is the state of Palestine. The white is Israel proper. That gray, those are lands they took in the 1967 war. Those lands were again deemed illegal. Under international law, if you and I fight and I take your land and the fight's over, you're supposed to either give the land back to me or let me on the land or pay me for the land. This isn't the 19th century where the victor goes the spoils. There's rules to the game in order to stop what we've been seeing, which is almost a century of continuous violence on both sides. So a viable Palestinian state, it just doesn't seem in the cards right now because there's a lack of political will and the realities on the ground. The realities are that map on the far right, I don't think that's even up to date. It's even less green. And so there are these little Palestinian islands now, and they're surrounded by Israeli settler roads, by the military, by settlers themselves. Palestinians can't move from one area to another very easily. It's very difficult. I've tried to do it many times, and you'll never get to your destination. You just spend your day going through checkpoints.
Right.
So it's not viable. It's not a viable state. Just look at it. Does that look like any kind of viable country? It looks like a shitload of little towns to me.
Right. I guess one question I have with the 1967 war, because it feels like a lot of times and I'm not super familiar with like all the European wars, but it feels like a lot of times when there are wars, land is often not given back. That seems to be like a very, very common thing. In fact, when land is given back, it's kind of like messy and
the opposite. The tradition is land gets given back, or it's paid for, or it's swapped.
okay.
That's the actual tradition when you look at the history of these things. So look at the US, right? So this wasn't ours. We expanded, settler colonial style, right? Manifest destiny. We stole them lands, right? And I'm not saying this is legitimate. I'm saying the system ensured that 1, you have a reservation system, land swaps. 2, they're getting paid. 3, there's government support. These are not adequate measures by any means. I'm not excusing colonialism. I am suggesting in wars, there's usually an exchange after the war. Usually. Not always, but usually. And in this case, you got to remember the time as well. Like, it's not the 18th century. It's 1967. And if you look at the globe, the 60s is decolonizing. All the European powers are pretty much giving up their territories. And with the exception of Palestine, those territories are going back to the people who lived there when the territory was stolen in the first place.
Okay.
So the UN, by the time 1967 rolls around, there are very firm rules about what constitutes legitimate war. Because the last time people were stealing land, it's like territory, it started World War II, right? But what happened post World War II? All that land went back eventually, right? All the land went back. And you see now countries like Russia are trying to take back the land, like Ukraine.
Right.
And take back the land they were forced to give up. So that was considered, Israel won the war, and the UN considered them to be, it was a legitimate war, and now they are an occupying power of those lands. as an occupying power, you're responsible for that territory, whether you like it or not, under international law. This Israeli government does not believe they're occupying anything. They liberated it. They won the war. It's theirs. Thank you very much. And there are more and more people within the government of Israel, which is probably the most, I think it's fair to say this is the most conservative government in the history of the country, which is saying a lot. They want more. They're calling for Eretz Israel, which means greater Israel in Hebrew. And greater Israel means that entire slice is Israel. The Sinai Peninsula, which is in the lower left-hand corner, that's Israel. Jordan is Israel. Southern Lebanon is Israel. Western Syria is Israel. That's the biblical Israel, okay? That's the dream of many, many conservative Israelis, many conservative Americans. That is the dream. And for the first time in the history of Israel, there actually is enough political power to start making moves that way.
Right. Okay. So, I'm super curious then, because I know Israel has given like land back to Egypt in the past, in certain wars. Um, and so I guess the question would be, what is, when Israel talks about like the Palestinians, like what is the reasoning typically given for them pushing into like the Gaza Strip, for example? Is it citing terrorism and like the violence that's occurring there? Do they basically view it as like a defensive war? Or like what's the arguments for Israel's side?
The arguments are, it's very simple. We have the right to defend ourselves. We're a sovereign nation state. We have the right to defend ourselves. Many Israeli leaders, I've heard them say, I've been in the room, they would look to you. I don't know, you're an American citizen?
Canadian.
Sorry. Okay. For the purpose of this exercise, same thing. They would look to you and say, would you accept rockets, raining over Ottawa, coming from, I don't know, like Minnesota? Would you accept that? You would never accept that. You would do something about it. That's all we're doing. We don't want to do these things, but we cannot accept rockets raining down on our civilians. And nor should they, by the way. Israel is 100% correct. As a sovereign nation state, they do have the right under international law to defend themselves. No doubt, 100%. So this recent activity in Jenin, which is at the northern edge of the West Bank, it's like right above the S in Palestine, in the 47 map. The Israeli forces recently went into Jenin, which is they call it a camp, but it's a town, about 50,000 people. Traditionally a pretty peaceful, calm area, but not anymore. Now it's a place where, a lot of bad things are going on. There's a lot of people doing a lot of bad things, a lot of desperation, including terrorism. So the argument given is rockets were coming in, so we need to go destroy those rockets. We know the terrorists live in these areas, and we want to get rid of the leadership. We want to deny them the infrastructure so they can't make bombs and make rockets. So that's the reason that the Israeli government will give pretty much every time. We have the right to defend ourselves. We're going after terrorists. That's all we're going after. Now, since like 2010, Israel has fully pulled out of Gaza. Israel is not in the Gaza Strip. That's that little green strip on the left-hand side of the 67 map. So now they're outside of it, and they just have a cordon, is what it's called. It's like it's not a siege. They just surround Gaza. They decide what goes in and what goes out, but they're not actually in the Gaza Strip. They don't really go in there anymore. And when they do, they say it's because, right, terrorists live there. We need to go take care of them. That's the same argument they'll use if they go into Sinai or Lebanon or Syria or Jordan. We're going after these people who are killing our citizens, which is a very popular argument.
Right. And I guess the question is, so maybe familiarize me with your work specifically. I know that you're an anthropologist. What's kind of your background, just so we have a grounding of like who you are and why you're talking about this?
They should have started about this, huh?
That's okay.
My introduction to the Middle East, ironically, was as a soldier. I was in the U.S. Army from 92 to 97. I graduated high school, went right in the Army, and went right in the infantry. And in 1995, 96, I was sent to Egypt to be a peacekeeper. So since the 1978 Oslo Peace Accords, 12 countries contribute about 1,000 troops every year to monitor the peace. The US funds the whole show. It's the longest standing peacekeeping mission on the planet. Until recently, it was a fairly chill assignment, and only certain units in the US Army get to do it. And it was just my unit's time to go. I'd never been, obviously. I was 19, I was 20. And that's when I got exposed to the region, was as a peacekeeper. That's my original perspective, and that's where I sort of got the bug for the region, left the Army, went to college here in Portland and studied Middle East studies, anthropology, history. That was like my three-legged stool. In college, I got involved in peacemaking and what's called dual narrative work, trying to see both sides of an equation. It's a method of conflict resolution. Got into conflict resolution a bit, went off to grad school, studied international relations and religion, focused on Palestine, did all my grad work on Palestine. Got out of school, didn't really know what I wanted to do. Do I get a PhD and like move to Palestine and do work on religion, or go work? I decided I'm going to go work. So I took a fellowship at the Congressional Research Service, which is a nonpartisan think tank for the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress has a very small staff that's basically their brain. Researchers like me would be asked questions, and I give you balanced feedback. And on the other hand, nonpartisan objective analysis. That year is really how I learned how to handle these issues in a nonpartisan way. And I am not a partisan except for equity and human rights. That's my skin in the game, not as an American, but like as a human rights advocate. So I covered, I was the Middle East religion and cultural affairs specialist for the US Congress from 04 to 05. And so I briefed members of Congress and their staff on the intersection of politics, religion, and militancy in the Middle East, and my area of focus was the Levant. The Levant is what we call Lebanon, Egypt, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Syria. Like that was my area. I did that for a little over a year, got a little bored of it, so I decided to leave and move to the State Department. And I served in the State Department for 11 years as a Middle East human rights foreign affairs officer. I was a civil servant, not a foreign service person. And I was a human rights officer for 11 countries, Iran, UAE, Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Tunisia, Morocco. And so I wrote, along with the folks at our embassies and indigenous communities, I wrote the annual human rights report for those countries. And so the US is the only country by law that's required to report on the status of human rights for every single country on the planet. President Carter pushed that forward. So I was one of the people who would travel to these countries, document, record, report, and then write a human rights report. And I did that for maybe like 6 years. And when you're not writing the report, you're collecting evidence, you're getting people out of jail, you're promoting human rights projects, trying to increase development, increase education, all these wonderful things that we try to do abroad. Then I decided I wanted to slow down a bit and focus on one country. So I spent a year as the Egypt desk officer for civil and political military affairs. So that means anything in the State Department that has anything to do with Egypt in the military and politics, it has to come to me. And I approve it, I edit it, I reject it, and then I report to our ambassador in Cairo. Did that for about a year. Then I was asked to join the State Department's Bureau for Intelligence and Research. Like the CIA gets all the attention for spy intelligence stuff. There's 14 other agencies
Mhm.
that collect and analyze intelligence. The State Department's office is the oldest one. It actually predates the CIA. And, this movie Oppenheimer is about to drop. I actually was in his office in the State Department because it was lead lined. It was really fun to. So I spent 3 years as an Israel, Palestine, Egypt intelligence analyst. And so those 3 years, those were crazy. And you get all the secrets, you're briefing all the people. I was Obama's briefer for human rights for a little bit and would brief him probably weekly
Like
on
directly?
what's going on.
Sit
Directly.
down with Obama. That's pretty cool.
No sitting. You don't sit with the president. That's in the movies. But in the Oval Office, 90 seconds, once a week, maybe.
Okay.
For about a year. This is during the Arab Spring. This is 2010 to 2012.
Okay.
And I was in Egypt during the revolution, and I came back and I had all these amazing insights. In the intelligence game, Egypt, Israel, and Palestine are considered training accounts. People don't stay on them very long. You learn a lot about intelligence and then you move off the way. I never left. It's what I'm all about. So I had like deep knowledge over time.
Why would
that-
these be training? I feel like there's so many complex historical
Yeah,
issues going
you're
on
right.
here that this feels
You're-
like
you're-
the worst place for like trainees. Like the worst.
The logic is that if you're new, no matter what your job is, you're right. Since it's so complex, if you're new and I send you to Cairo, you're going to learn so much. You're going to learn so many things about all these issues and the region. Whereas if I were to send you to, who should I pick on? Like Morocco or Libya. You're going to learn about Libya, but there are not a lot of big issues for Libya. You don't get everything with Libya. With Egypt, you get everything, every issue you could ever think of. And so the idea is throw you on that account for like 18 months, and then we'll send you to where we really think you should be. Now you understand what it's like in a high pressure situation. Now you know what it's like working in an embassy of 20,000 people. Now you should be able to handle anything. It's really stupid. We also did it because we didn't want, it's very racist. We thought people were going to go native. We thought if we send these white Americans to the Middle East and if they stay in one place too long, then they're going to become too sympathetic to the indigenous community. So keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. You don't really stay in any one place for more than 2 years. I didn't like that.
Right.
Like I told you, my academic background, it was always Middle East. That's all I know. I have all the student loan debt. I'm not trying to go to South America. I'm sure it's really fascinating, but this is where I made my bed. So I stayed, which was a little weird to stay on these accounts for like over a decade. But the advantage was I had a long view. And when the shit hit the fan, it was fun to be in demand and to be able to brief people. So I was it's called the Presidential Daily Briefing. That's the PDB. It's a book, comes out every day around 4 a.m. And if you write articles for the book, you follow the book as the book gets briefed from the president on down. And if there's ever questions on what you wrote, you're there to answer the question. Now,
Okay.
since I always wrote on Egypt, there was always going to be questions, so I always got to go in there.
Yeah. I'm going to
Oh, yeah,
intervene
that's
super
the-
quickly. I just got
Yeah.
rated with about like 200 new viewers, so I'm just going to very quickly TLDR them on what's going on. So I'm talking to an individual. He works in kind of understanding the Israel-Palestine conflict. He's done varying levels. I won't cover all of his experience. It was a very long litany, but he's worked for the presidential suite doing intelligence and kind of research on this area. And he's talking to us about kind of like the nuance and complexities about the tension going on in this area and why no resolution seems to be arrived at any point in time. So if you guys would like to ask him questions, you can at me. There's no guarantee that I'll ask your question, and I will vet for like appropriateness, but assuming that you're not trolling me, you'll probably be good. So that's what's going on. And luckily we got rated by like a channel that's really into geopolitics. Dylan Burns is a really big Ukrainian kind of like content creator and covers it, and he's in Ukraine right now covering the war. So
Oh wow.
it's a
Yeah,
good
that's
rate
something
for
I
this topic.
follow very closely. Now that one, I do pick sides, and they are not the perfect side by any stretch, but I am firmly on the side of Ukraine. Firmly.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really interesting conflict, but some like parallels.
Do you
So yeah,
think the
that's
two-state solution could have worked? Like when you
yes.
look at the mapping, do you think that that's a reasonable, like the 1947 mapping specifically, does that seem
It
like a
could have
reasonable
worked.
answer?
It could have worked. I'm not in a really optimistic place about it anymore. But I'm like one of the last of my group of colleagues to be like give up on it. I absolutely believe there was a path to having a viable two-state solution where Israel was able to live in peace and security, and Palestine was able to live in peace and security with an economic future. I do believe it was possible. I think I actually tend to think that the two-state solution is one of the many unintended consequences of what we did post 9/11.
Mm.
I think things were moving along. And then in 2000, Israel elected pretty hardcore dude, Ariel Sharon, who was the general in charge of the 67 and 73 war. He was in charge of all the settlements. He was elected, not elected, but he became prime minister. And it was a little rocky, but as Clinton was leaving and Bush was coming on, it looked like we were going to continue with what Clinton started in 94. And then 9/11 happened, and we decided we just hate all the brown people in Southwest Asia. And we dropped the ball. I think when it comes to Israel Palestine, this might be controversial. Any lack of a solution is because there's been a lack of imagination on the part of mostly the US and a few other Western powers. The reason why there's not a successful resolution for all parties, I'd say, is mostly because of the US and Western Europe.
So I'm curious about the 1947 because it looks like these lines, again, I don't know anything about the area, so I understand that my lack of confusion is born out of like lack of knowledge. But when I like look at the lines as like a super lay person, I go, these look like awful geographic borders to have because you've got these two countries that are at necessary tension with each other with like constant kind of like lines somewhat intermingling and like no clear line, like Palestine's kind of within Israel and Israel's kind of like wrapping around. We've got the Gaza Strip going on. These feel like really, and I'm sure that there's historical purposes behind the lines in the way that they are. It just feels like a really difficult thing
Yeah.
to manage geographically.
And those folks in 47 who rejected the plan, that's what they said.
Okay.
This doesn't even look like a real state. Show me on the map any state that kind of looks like this.
Right.
The concept is called contiguity. And so all nation states need to be contiguous. Palestine is not contiguous, right?
Yep.
Gaza, if you look at the 47 map, and if you were to zoom in, the top right-hand portion of the strip does touch the West Bank.
Okay.
Barely. It barely touches. Technically, that's contiguity, technically. So is it viable? I think we could have done things to make it viable. Many people argued that Palestine, forgive the expression, was stillborn, that it was a poison pill, that it was set up to fail from the very start. Others would argue, I've heard this from many of my Palestinian friends, that Palestine is 100% Palestinian, and now it's 97% Israeli, and we're negotiating over 3%. Can you please just give me the 3%? And we'll be happy. Is it sustainable? No. A lot of things would have to happen in order to make that a real viable state. Personally, I think that train has left the station, and what we're looking at, my belief is the best hope is a bi-national state, which I don't think a good chunk of Israelis would accept, because that means Israel would forfeit this, what I want to call it, this, it's not a rule, this exceptional intent that Israel be a majority Jewish state, right?
Right.
There's no country on the map that carries it like that. There's no country that has an exclusive claim based on a religious identity. Even Iran, which is a theocracy, Iran doesn't say it has to be majority Shia Muslim. So Israel is a really unique case because they don't have a constitution, but their basic law says that Israel must be a majority Jewish state. If you make it a binational state where they live side by side in this massive new country called Israelistan, I don't know, but the West Bank, Gaza, Israel, one country, no borders, now you're not going to be a majority Jewish state. And there are already deep concerns among many Israelis about the 20 to 30% that are Arab Palestinian that live within their borders. So a binational state, like I think that's the future, but I'm not even sure the Israeli government would accept that anymore because it'll dilute the Jewishness of the state. That's literally what they'll say. The leaders will say if we allow the binational state, it will dilute the Jewish character of the country.
So when they're talking about the Jewish character, it sounds like, I feel like for Western ears it sounds like a race realist argument, but is it more of like a cultural heritage or is it like both?
Yeah, doesn't that raise a fascinating question that's me and some of my Israeli and or Jewish friends talk about? What does it mean to be Jewish? Is it an ethnicity? Is it a race?
I
Is
know,
it a...
like, and then again, is Jewish, it's hard to separate from the religion, even though
Exactly.
being Jewish isn't the same thing as being,
So the majority of Israelis are secular Jews or
it,
cultural
yeah,
Jews is another term, right? So it's really hard to distinguish. The government of Israel says that if your mama is Jewish, you're Jewish.
right.
If your mom is Jewish or any woman in your line is Jewish, you're Jewish and you have the right of return called aliyah. And so if you can demonstrate that you have through the matrilineal line Jewish heritage, ethnic heritage, not cultural, like your mom needs to be like biologically, ethnically Jewish, then you're in and you can emigrate to Israel. The basic law says the majority of the citizens must be Jewish, meaning proven through the matral line. And so right now, Israel proper, take out the West Bank, take out Gaza, include occupied territory. So the 67 map, it's 73% Jewish, 20+% Arab. And the Arab numbers are growing. The Arab Israelis reproduce at a rate 3 times that of Israelis. Israelis reproduce on a level like Southern Europe, like maybe one kid, like they are flat demographically. Their population is not growing. And so there are many in the Knesset, that's the Israeli Congress. There are many, maybe 10% of the entire Congress who believe they should be forcibly expelling Arab Israelis out of Israel into the West Bank and Gaza to make sure that it's a majority Jewish state. The problem is that the Arab Israelis are technically citizens, even though they're not treated as such. And so you just can't kick out an Israeli citizen, even though they want to. Segments of the government want to.
Okay, interesting. So,
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you think like a boss would agree to any level? Like when you say like the Palestinians, because you said before the Palestinians are trying to say yes, it just doesn't happen. Is a boss the one who's saying yes essentially to these treaties?
So Abbas is elected in 2005. So he is there after Oslo. So Yasser Arafat. Palestinians have only had 2 leaders.
Yeah.
That's it. Yasser Arafat, who founded the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who was a terrorist, and then he won a Nobel Peace Prize when he put down his weapons. He said yes to most of the deals we're talking about today. Abbas inherited all of this from Arafat. Abbas said yes to other agreements. Would he continue to say yes? Like, I don't think so. I think, one, he's almost 90. 2, he's really isolated. 3, he's really corrupt. 4, he has no support. 5, he has no one in the government to really execute his orders. So like he's like the emperor with no clothes. He has the title and he has no power. He is a figurehead these days. He hasn't really had any power, I'd say, since like 2010, 2012, like Obama, like the end of his term. A boss had some power. Even if he wanted to say yes to a deal today, I mean, there are no deals to say yes to, first of all. But if there was a deal to say yes to, I don't know how a boss's government could actually execute it and reinforce it. I know Israel can. I have no doubt that they have the ability, because they're a proper state, to execute a deal. I'm not sure Palestine can right now. And I doubt a boss, given like literally what's happening today, 17-year-old kid got shot in the head. Israel's back in the West Bank. We just don't talk about it anymore, apparently. Given what's going on literally right now, he can't say yes.
Right.
When Palestinians are dying, a boss can't say yes to anything, or else Palestinians will kill him.
Right.
So I don't think he could say yes. There was a time Israelis, a lot of Palestinians, certainly Americans in DC, we thought Abbas was the guy. I thought Abbas was the guy. I thought he was the guy. He was moderate enough to bring the peace process forward, but reality took over, and I don't think he can say yes. But there's no deal to say yes to. There's no deal on the table. They're not even talking.
So you acknowledge one thing that I think is, because a lot of people are being like, well, you're not being very bipartisan, but you've acknowledged multiple times is Palestinian violence specifically. How often in these conflicts is it getting triggered by violence from one side? Like I'm thinking of like the kidnapping of the Israeli teenagers in like 2014. Obviously,
Yeah.
Hamas denies that, but that's what's being cited as like the trigger of like the Gaza war. Is this Israeli propaganda? Is this true? Is it
Yeah.
oftentimes kind of like violence from Palestine that triggers something that then gets utilized by Israel to push further into the borders? Like, what's the dynamic that's going on here
Yeah.
a lot of the time?
And to be clear, I said I held a role
Yeah.
20 years ago where I was bipartisan. I am not bipartisan. I'm not here to be fair and balanced. That's some other schmuck, okay? I have an agenda, the agenda of human rights. I do take a stand. I do think Israel is an apartheid state. Yeah, absolutely. I do believe Palestinians commit acts of terror. Yeah. I believe in the international state system that has supported this globe since 1648. And if you're in the club, and Israel's in the club, you have responsibilities, and they're not living up to them. Palestinians, the government, they also have responsibilities, but it's actually less than, because they don't have the ability to control their people because they're not a real state. Palestinians use political violence. I'm not a big fan of terrorism because it's so inaccurate and it's so vague now post 9/11. Palestinians will commit acts of politically motivated violence. Without a doubt, it's a weapon of the weak. It's an asymmetric war. It's a guerrilla war. It's a nasty little war that's been going on for 60 years. I actually am shocked more Palestinians are not taking up arms and going crazy given the state of things and the state of existence that Palestinians live through. The cycle of violence is always, it's like tit for tat. It's like he said, like all Israeli Palestinian policies are domestic, okay? So yes, an Israeli young soldier is kidnapped. That's in the game. That's been going on. Yes, that's the pretext they gave for going into Gaza. But they really went into Gaza. This isn't a conspiracy. I just know my shit. They went into Gaza so that they could actually give Gaza back and get Gaza off their books. The Israeli Defense Force was tired of having to pacify Gaza. It's impossible down there. So they went in hard to get kicked out and be like, oh, we're just going to leave. You're right. Gaza's Palestine. Give us our guy back and it's yours. So that's what they did. They gave back their guy. They did a swap because that's what they do. And Israel left Gaza. And now Gaza has no Israeli presence, but Israel controls the entire country, what goes in, what goes out, all the trade, blah, blah, blah. So, like, is it tit for tat? Yes. I've never seen much benefit in, like, who started what? I mean, it's a ridiculous argument that leads no, it's a tautology. It just gets circular.
Right. It
Just
seems like I'm eating like an Ouroboros a little bit, right? Like as like Israel continues to put pressure on like Palestinian lands, Palestinians are increasingly like reacting through like violence and like is Hamas organized in its violence or is it like because I'm trying to figure out like in the kidnapping of the teenagers, is it this organized? Sorry?
incredibly organized,
Okay.
especially during that. Like that was an operation to grab someone.
Okay. So that
Which
was
is
intentional. Was there a target in mind? Like who were these teenagers that were kidnapped?
anyone will do.
Okay.
Any Israeli soldier will do. Yeah, Hagit just happened to be the dude. Um, unfortunately, that is a normal part of the conflict. We're not used to that here in the West. We don't see kidnappings as a legitimate form of contest. We don't think that. There, they do, both sides. It's part of the tension. You could even argue it actually keeps a lid on things. It actually can control the violence, knowing that if I go too far, you're going to kill my guy. So, like the tit for tat, like who began the violence, who didn't begin the violence, it's just not a very useful exercise to go down. I think that, it's not an even conflict, so bipartisanship doesn't work. You have one as a nation supported with, I'm acting like I don't have the numbers right here. Hold on one sec. So the U.S. gives Israel $3.3 billion per year in foreign military financing. $3.3 billion per year. We also give the Israeli government $500 million a year in direct aid. Then there's all the trade. We also give them a lot of advanced technology to keep Israel defended, like Iron Dome, shooting down missiles with other missiles. So you have one actor. The Israeli economy is amazing. They have an amazing military. Big Daddy US is their power patron. Israel is under no threat of destruction. That is a bunch of bullshit because Daddy has their back.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as the US has their back, Israel is safe. The real threat is from within Israelis themselves. You have one actor, a lot of money, very influential, a lot of power, a lot of military. Then you have Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
Like without a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And anytime you lock a people in a jail and deny them dignity, you deny them the basic rights of humanity. You live at 85 cents a day. It's 5 generations. The majority of Palestinian activism is nonviolent. We just don't talk about it here. The majority of Palestinian resistance is nonviolent and is daily. It's a weapon of the weak. I mean, what do we expect? I'm not excusing it. I understand it. I understand the Israeli citizen who's like, protect me at all costs, send them in heavy, destroy those Palestinians. I want to be safe. I understand the Palestinian who's completely hopeless without any dignity, any respect or decency, getting to the point of desperation where they actually believe the only thing they can do is strap a bomb on their chest and blow themselves up. It's such a desperate, sad, nihilistic thing to behold. I see it both. I believe that Palestinians are on the receiving end of apartheid policies. And so I'm not a pacifist. There is evil in this world. And sometimes you got to put it down by force of arms. I was a grunt. I was a ranger. I am no shrinking violet. I'm not a pacifist. I do not believe in political violence, though. And I understand it. Like, what do you want to do? Just keep taking it and taking it and taking it? Like, it's not going to happen. I live in a real world. And in a real world, if you keep oppressing people, eventually they're going to lash out. And it's going to be nasty and brutish.
Right.
And it's terrible on both sides,
Right.
but it's not even. It's not an even conflict by any stretch.
Right. The issue that gets really complicated, right, is though when they say something like any Israeli citizen will do, that's terrifying for an Israeli citizen.
Well, sorry, I misspoke. Any IDF soldier will do.
Okay. So it
The
was a soldier.
Palestinians, by and large, Palestinian militants do not cross that line and kidnap civilians.
Okay.
That tends to be a bright red line for Hamas and all the other groups. There are new groups that are playing
In
that don't.
Palestine?
Yeah, there are new groups, militant groups that don't give a shit about these rules, and they're going crazy out there. And those are the ones that worry me, not Hamas. They don't worry me at all, actually. It's very bounded what they do and do not do. So no. Any IDF soldier will do. That's the chip they
Okay.
want.
Okay.
They know, most militants know if they take a civilian, they're going to reap the whirlwind.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
That's
okay.
a line that cannot be crossed.
I'm glad I clarified that because I was about to be like, I mean, if it's any Israeli citizen, like kind of all the Israeli concerns are somewhat being validated by that, which is like a problem in the conflict itself.
All their
IVF.
concerns are valid and legitimate. Like, I shudder to think what I would do if I'm walking my kid to temple and there's rocket fire raining over me from just over there. Like, I understand, I get it. That's the indiscriminate rocket fire is really hurting the Palestinian cause. It doesn't actually, they don't tally up a lot of casualties. They're not actually trying to kill people, civilians, but they do. And that's what will trigger such a heavy response. The military, they actually have a formula. It's like 6-1, and you can see it play out right now. Every one IDF soldier who's killed through militancy, 5 or 6 of yours go down, and they will not discriminate. The Israelis don't discriminate.
Like they are killing citizens, is what you're saying.
They are. I'm just here to tell you, sometimes Americans, sometimes Canadians. Like, facts. I've been on the street and have received incoming fire from Israeli forces because I'm walking around with Palestinians at a nonprofit and somebody threw a rock.
Right.
And so if you throw a rock, they're going to throw bullets. That makes no sense to me. That's not proportional. If I throw a rock at your tank, I'm 15, and I throw a rock at your tank out of frustration and like a fuck you, and you turn your cannon on me and you smoke me and the entire block because I threw a rock. That's the disproportionality that is causing.
And there's clear evidence of this where Israel is targeting citizens and Hamas is distinctly not. Like there's been no citizens of Israel killed.
No, I didn't say that. I said that Hamas and all Palestinian militants understand if they kill a civilian, that's a red line. That's what I said, right? And that they try very hard not to kill civilians, because if they do, Israel will destroy them utterly and completely. Utterly incomplete. It is a red line. That's why if you fire a rocket into Israel and you're not targeting a military facility, if you actually do what Russia does in Ukraine, like hit a residential area, you guaranteed they're going to come in. Yeah. They're going to go into Palestine and do damage, because that is a line. Because like you said, regular old civilians would lose their ever-loving mind, and that would turn on the Israeli government. So what I'm saying is the Israeli Defense Force, there is a historical pattern of having very indiscriminate fire hitting civilians, some of which is carried on camera. This is not news. I mean, there's many charges in The Hague at the International Criminal Court against IDF soldiers. I have personally sanctioned Israeli units for using U.S. manufactured military grade components against civilians, and we've demonstrated that they did it. There's an actual law that we have in the books called the Leahy Amendment, named after Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont. If any U.S. dollar is used to violate human rights, you're in trouble. And I myself, when I was a human rights officer, I successfully proved like 6 or 7 cases.
Right.
Where they used U.S. U.S. military equipment in a commission of a gross human rights violation. Like it's documented, they've been held to account. But the behavior continues. And they're held to a higher standard. You can't say that to the Palestinians. You can't go to the UN because they're not a state. So they're not held to the same standards that Israel is held to. That's the price of being a democracy. You tend to be held to a higher standard.
Is Palestine supported by any like Iran or any Arab nations that are going to be distinctly anti-American or anti-Israel?
So Iran's not Arab, they're Persian. Iran and Palestine have never had a great relationship. The government of Palestine is not friendly with the government of Iran. Because one, Palestine Sunni Shia, Iran is Shia Muslim. Shia the minority. There's kind of historic beef between the Sunnis and the Shia. Iran is using Palestine, and most Palestinians know that. Hamas is friendly with Iran. Hamas is friendly. So the leading militant group or terrorism group, we've labeled them, the US and Canada actually. The US and Canada have officially designated Hamas as a foreign terrorist organization. So most of the world says Hamas is a terrorism group, but no one in Europe says that, strangely enough. So Iran has no big friends to Palestine. They do supply weapons to Hamas, which is a huge problem for everyone.
Right.
And something I'd love if Israel was actually serious about stopping. Egypt and Jordan are probably the biggest allies of Palestine.
Why are you so concerned about the supplying of weaponry? Like, why do you want that stopped?
I don't like it when third parties get involved like that. Iran is a hostile foreign power to US interests, Western interests. They're hostile to Israel. Israel is an ally. They're not a great one, but they are an ally. I don't like the idea that Iran is using Israel-Palestine as a proxy war against the US. I don't like that. I don't like proxy wars at all. You fight face to face. And so Iran is exacerbating it. They're throwing gasoline on the fire. They want it to be a shit show so that their boys Hamas can take over the whole show. They really want to see a Palestine dominated by religious thought. Palestine is surprisingly secular. Iran would like to make it a very religious state. So they muck around a lot in Palestine, and they're very powerful. I'm not a big fan of what Iran is doing in Palestine, and Israel is very worried about it. They do believe Iran is the number one threat to the nation, not Palestine, and it's not even close because Iran is marching towards getting a nuclear weapon, and they just could rain terror. So if Iran continues to funnel money and arms to Hamas, that's going to motivate Israel to go back into Gaza and bring the hammer down, because they cannot have Iran shipping advanced stuff into Gaza. Jordan is a really old, stable, steady friend of Palestine. Jordan and Palestine were one country back in the day before the World War II.
Okay.
The king of Jordan, King Abdullah Hussein II, is a literal descendant of the founding families of Palestine. He's very popular in Palestine. He's more popular than their own president. He provides a lot of money. Jordan's the only country that has extended citizenship to Palestinian refugees.
Okay.
Of all the places Palestinians left, Jordan actually gave them full citizenship. A lot of camps are on the east bank. So that the line on the right-hand side of Palestine above that body of water, which is the Sea of Galilee, everything to the right of that water, that's all Jordan.
Okay.
It used to be called Transjordan. So
So
Jordan,
why wasn't
friends.
why was Palestine land not just given to Jordan, like originally? Like, why wasn't it just completely subsumed into Jordan? And why aren't they just like one nation?
Bomb questions. So when I said that the plan was to have this partition and the British would give up their power, they would give their power to the Husseins, to the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, and say, all right, This is now yours. You're actually a legitimate king. There's no legitimate ruler in Palestine. You're the legitimate ruler. You literally hold the keys to the Holy Sepulchre Church. The family has had a claim on Palestinian leadership for decades. So the plan, the idea, some Israeli government officials still like this idea. Send all the Palestinians to Jordan. Just push them all across the Jordan River. Give them a chunk of the West Bank, and they can have Gaza. Israel keep the other chunk. Boom. Now you're in Transjordan, like you said you wanted to be all along. The king doesn't want that because the U.S. doesn't want that, and Jordan is, for all intents and purposes, Jordan does what we say. Jordan is beholden to the U.S. Jordan has no military. Jordan has no oil. Jordan is stuck between a lot of really hardcore countries. Jordan can be taken over like that. So they do what we say. So if we tell the king, please do not say you're going to accept all the Palestinians, he's not going to accept all the Palestinians. I'm being really simplistic, but that's how big power politics works. That's how realpolitik works. You want to do that? Well, you're going to lose all your money. We're not going to defend you. So he's not going to accept them.
Right.
So what he does is the king of Jordan tries to make the lives of the Palestinians living in his borders a little better. You know, he actually married a Palestinian. It was a big deal. The queen is Palestinian. She's an East Banker from the camps. And he married a Palestinian woman, Queen Rania. She's Palestinian in the hopes that that would help soothe and smooth things out and make sure he doesn't become unpopular. So he doesn't have a huge, I tell you, the Arab leaders are not motivated to solve the issue, right? So the king of Jordan is not motivated because we're not motivated. Egypt has so many problems, we don't even know where to start. They actually shut down all border crossings in the Sinai Peninsula, which is against the international law. I know because I was a peacekeeper there. You can't shut down that border. I'm talking about the lower left-hand border in Palestine. That's the Sinai Peninsula to the left there. Egypt gives money. Egypt is one of the peacemakers. Whenever there's a beef, Egypt will be like, oh, we'll bring them together, come to Cairo, we'll sit down. Egypt is ruled by a dictator these days. Egypt really doesn't want to solve the peace process either. They're focusing on what's going on inside of the country. So you got two friends, they're your buddies if you're Palestinian, but they're not huge about ending the crisis. While that's going on, Israel has been moving to execute what's called the Abraham Accord. The Abraham Accords are a drive to normalize relations between Israel and its Arab neighbors. So from 1947 till today, there's an Arab boycott, meaning legally, technically speaking, if you're an Arab majority country, it's illegal to trade with Israel. It's illegal. So a lot of Arab countries don't have Israeli embassies. Most Arab countries do not fly into Israel. Most Israelis cannot fly directly to an Arab capital. They boycott. Over the years, the boycott has not really been a boycott, but they'll say it's a boycott. Israel has moved hard to normalize, in part, to take friends away from Palestine, to isolate Palestine. That's one part of the strategy. So Israel and Saudi, another friend of Palestine, Saudi Arabia, they're becoming friends. Turkey and Israel, another buddy of Palestine, becoming friends. Egypt and Israel already have a peace treaty. Lebanon and Israel, not friends. Syria and Israel, not friends. But one by one, the Israeli government, and it's very smart of the government, is to drop the boycott nonsense and use economics as a way to connect to the Arab countries. And the Arab countries are actually going for it for their own reasons. So Saudi Arabia and Israel are becoming friends. And in return, this might be like headlines for a lot of viewers, but in return for Saudi normalizing with Israel, meaning recognizing Israel, that's what normalization means. The US and other powers, maybe Canada, will support Saudi Arabia's slow move towards nuclear power. So that's what they're going to get in exchange for normalizing. And the friends of Palestine, there'll be few. There will not be a lot of friends for Palestine left. which maybe is a good thing for Palestinians because it's not like the Arab countries were doing much for them anyway.
Yeah. So I guess one question I have, so when I looked up Hamas and like killings that were being done against civilians, I saw in 2021 that there was like this Washington Post article. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I can send you the jailbroke version of it, where it talks about how essentially like rockets were being fired like somewhat indiscriminately, and Human Rights Watch labeled it as like a war crime. Do you know much about this situation?
Yeah. I
Was
mean,
this Hamas or was this like one of
maybe
these
not
new
that
groups?
particular incident, but that formula you just described, Hamas launching indiscriminate rockets into civilian territories, international human rights organizations condemning them. That's a normal cycle. Yeah, I said Hamas will rain indiscriminate rocket fire down on Israeli civilian populations. That there is no debate. There's no argument there. They're indiscriminate because they're dumb weapons, meaning they're old technology. They can't guide them. You push the button and it just goes. They're from the 80s. They're not super fancy modern things. So they're using really old, inaccurate. Most of them blow up in the tubes before they even freaking launch. They're dangerous rockets, yeah, and they're indiscriminately killing civilians. War crimes. So it might sound like a stupid detail, but again, we need to call things by their proper name. Non-states cannot be accused of war crimes. That's what states do. Just like as a citizen, as an individual, I cannot violate your human rights as an individual. I can assault you. States can violate your human rights, not an individual private citizen. The police officer can violate your civil rights because the police officer is an agent of the state, right? I am an agent of myself. So I can break a law, like committing murder. I'm committing homicide. Indiscriminate rocket fire to me is a weapon of terror. That is an act of terror. Like literally in the definition of the word, a random event to incite anxiety and fear so that you change a political direction.
Mhm.
So when Hamas fires rockets indiscriminately, is it a war crime? No, because they're not a state. Individuals can't commit war crimes.
So then is it an act
It's,
of
uh,
terrorism?
it's an act of terrorism. For me, I would define indiscriminate rocket fire on a civilian population is like the definition of terrorism.
Okay.
No, I don't know what that gets us because they're a terrorist organization. So we've already decided, except for a few Western European countries, we have already decided they're terrorists. So everything they do is an act of terrorism. So like, there's no debate. But I don't like the loose talk around war crimes. Shit is serious.
Right.
And if we start labeling every act as a war crime, we're going to lose the power of it being a war crime. You want to charge them with being a war crime, make them a state. And so they're responsible. They haven't signed on to any of the treaties that govern war crimes. Right. So those are all based on treaties. There's not a natural law out there. So we've all decided doing that is wrong, and we all signed, except for a few countries like North Korea, and Iran, and Saudi Arabia, and Sudan. So technically speaking, if they haven't signed on to it, you can't accuse them of it. Like,
Right.
that's how it works. So yes, it is an act of terror. It's very easy to claim as an act of terror. But they're not a state, so it's hard to like haul them into, the International Criminal Court and charge them. Like you really can't. What we could do is like, I guess you could snatch them and put them in Israeli or Palestinian jail, send them to court and try and convict them. And both sides do that. Israelis and Palestinians put people through their judicial system all the time. And there are many, many, many people in jail in Palestine and in Israel who are serving out really tough sentences for carrying out these acts, or they're just killed.
Do you think there's any end? Because it feels like there's no. It feels like there's no solution.
So I used to be really high on the two-state. I was a two-stater. That was my camp from, the 90s until, I'd say around the time Obama became president. I'm not saying it's his fault, but around those years, 08, 012 is when I realized, I don't think it's going to happen. Am I hopeful, that there'll be two viable states living side by side in peace and security? No, I'm not hopeful for that. I do not believe there's going to be an independent, viable Palestinian state. I just don't see it. I don't see it. I do see the reality of a binational state where more and more Palestinians who live within Israel proper, meaning 1967 Israel, many in 20% of the population, like a couple billion people maybe, they are more and more, they're activating their voices politically to demand more of the Israeli government and less about the right of return, less about Palestinian statehood, and more about how do we exist on this land equally with you. And that's fascinating because Israel they have incredibly strong domestic human rights protections that are being eroded slowly. Israel is going through a churn that very few of us could have predicted. These demonstrations around the judiciary within Israel, the largest ever in the history of the nation. Just today, 1,000 Israeli reservists, reserve soldiers. So Israel, everyone has to serve for 1 to 3 years, man and women. Yeah, women serve 1, men serve 2. They actually do allow for gender fluid service as well. They have a different cutout. They've allowed queer soldiers for decades. I'm using the term broadly. 1,000 reservists said, if you do this change, we're not going to ever respond to the call. And so there are things within Israel, I'm like, wow, I've never seen Israelis move like this. That makes me wonder, like, maybe, we talk about the absence of the Israeli center. Like, we don't see the Israeli center. We don't see the doves. We see the hawks. And the doves, like, where are they? Now we're starting to see the center. And I wonder if all this domestic stuff, like the prime minister is going to be on trial soon, kind of like Trump, except he is the sitting leader. Like, he might go to jail. He might get kicked out. The government is becoming so extreme. This is what Israelis say. So extreme that there's going to be a lot of domestic political churn. And, like, who knows? Like, who knows what could end up there? Like, there is plenty of Israelis know what's really going on. The words I use are the words a good 35, 40% of Israelis use.
Right.
Like, these are if you pick up Haaretz, which is a center-left newspaper, they literally say, we live in apartheid. This is apartheid. And so I have confidence in Israeli citizens, but I don't have confidence in the Israeli government. And, like, this moment isn't globally, it's just not a good moment for Palestinians and the two-state solution. This is the time of the strongman. This is the time of the autocrat, nativism, populism, xenophobia, ethno-nationalism, nativism. This is the era, Trumpism without Trump. You see it all over the globe. Even, your fair land is having issues, right? And I just don't know if this is the ideal time for a two-state solution. And the U.S. has no will. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but the U.S. is getting out of the Middle East business. For better or worse, we are not messing around with Southwest Asia. We've decided to move on to East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, Eastern Europe. We're done. And so without the U.S., without a credible partner to help shepherd this, I just don't see how it could ever come to pass. I think it's foolish to think that Israelis and Palestinians can pull themselves out of a death spiral. Right. I think it takes someone else has to step in, the UN, NATO, I don't know, Turkey, Egypt, the US, but someone else is going to have to help them. And that sounds paternalistic. It sounds a little sexist and racist. But sometimes conflict is so thick and the stakes are so high that the parties to the conflict, they just can't see it. They need a facilitator. They need an ombudsman. We were that. We weren't great at it, but we were there. The U.S. When I say we, I'm sorry. And by extension, it was the P4. So it's the U.S., the European Union, Russia, and China. Those are the four powers that typically are trying to broker something. China is really the only actor there on the ground, and they're not trying to create peace. Russia is too busy fighting a war. They're not in there. They're working in sub-Saharan Africa. The EU, they talk about the two-state solution. It's more popular there than it is in North America. We have basically all we are trying to do is repair the damage Trump did with the Palestinians and Israelis. We're in damage control mode. If Biden gets a second term, towards the end of that term, you might see a peace process start back up again. If a Republican wins, you will never see the peace process. It'll be dead and buried. It's really that simple. Especially if Ron DeSantis wins. He doesn't even say Israel. He says Judea and Samaria, which is code for the greater Israel that I was explaining. Ron DeSantis says it's disputed. He literally said yesterday, I don't give a shit what the State Department says. It's disputed. So if he becomes president, he will make Trump look like a Palestine lover if he gets elected president.
So tell me about the human rights violation, because you said you're on the side of human rights. So what human rights specifically do you feel are being violated by Israel towards Palestine?
Wow. I'll do the big ones. The ones there that Israel is most cited for by other governments, including the U.S. and nonprofits like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International or Freedom House. The big one is the restriction of movement. So that is a gross violation of international human rights law. You cannot restrict the free movement of people. You cannot do that's apartheid. You can't set up, you can control your borders, but within a territory, it's illegal for the Oregon state troopers to set up checkpoints every 5 miles in the state of Oregon for no reason other than to check your IDs. That is illegal. You cannot stop the free movement of people. That's a big one. Forced segregation, forced isolation, the freedom of religion, thought, and conscience is another big one. That's something I had a lot of experience with because I was a religious freedom officer for a few years for Israel and Palestine.
But
So
Palestinians are secular typically. So what freedom of religion?
The nation of Palestine, I would argue, it's quite debatable, but I would argue that Palestine as a nation is a lot more secular than people think. But the U.S. is a secular nation, but we are the most religious nation on the planet. So just because you're secular doesn't mean you're not religious, right? It just means you don't want religion to run your government. And religion has never run any government in the history of Palestine, ever. Always been a secular government. That said, Palestine, like most of the world, they're a community of believers. You know, most Palestinians do believe in a God, right? Not all, but most do, just like most Israelis believe in God. But the nation is secular. The state of Israel is becoming less and less secular. The formal organs of state power are more and more falling under Orthodox Jewish community control, which is really upsetting to many Israelis. It's a really big issue for Israel. So the freedom of movement, the freedom of thought and belief, for instance, you cannot prevent people from going to their houses of worship. That is illegal under human rights law. I cannot stop you from praying at your temple.
Right.
The challenge is in Jerusalem, in one area that is really small, a couple of 100 square meters, you have like the number one religious site in all in Judaism, the Western Wall.
Yeah.
The Western Wall is the wall of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the number 3 holy site for Muslims, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the number 2 site for Christians. So that's a problem. I'll grant that. Like, it's a contested city. Jerusalem is far more peaceful than people think. I'm there like pretty much yearly, and it's shocking how well people get along in Jerusalem. But having like all that in one area is tight. It's tough. Still, you can't say you can't pray here. That is illegal. I actually worked a case in 2006 that brings this violation home. Israel started to build a wall, a barrier. It's not all a wall, but there's a barrier that runs pretty much completely around the West Bank. That big green chunk, there's a barrier that goes around the whole thing. In some places, it's like 80-foot high concrete with machine guns. Other places, it's like sand berms, but they've walled it off. The wall was started after 9/11, 2001, 2002. The wall portion of it went right through this town called Tubas. And it went right through a mosque. It went right through a church, and then it went around the temple. It literally went through the mosque. I've been there. That's a violation. So now I can't get to my mosque. There's a wall there. The mosque just isn't the mosque, just like the church just isn't the church. It's also where you get advice. It's where you meet people. It's where they take care of your kids. You learn to read, right? It's not just about God, especially in Palestine when there's no money, there's no infrastructure. The mosque is everything. And so me and 3 other people raised this issue with the Israeli Defense Force. We were concerned this could be a violation. We don't want this to be the report because this one's going to get you in trouble. The Israeli Defense Forces, they understood like, yeah, I don't really care about human rights, but if we keep this wall here, we're just going to make more terrorists. So we should move the wall, not because it's a violation of human rights, even though if you get drunk with them, they'll be like, that's a violation of human rights. They'll say publicly it's in the Israeli interest to move the wall because we don't want to create more militants. So we'll do it. And so they move the wall 400 yards. And so now the church is wide open, the mosque is wide open, and the community can now access it. Had they resisted that call, there was enough pressure because Bush was president and that guy was all about faith communities and he didn't care what faith you were. If they didn't change it, we probably would have low-key sanctioned them. We wouldn't have given them all that year. We wouldn't have told anyone why, but Israel would have known. So that is actually a case, it's well documented in our human rights reports, where we were like, that's a human rights violation. We really want to work with you on this one. We can't hide this one, man. That's like a wall. And it clearly goes right to the church. So to Israel's credit, the military's credit, they shifted the wall. They destroyed 400 yards and they rebuilt it. Sadly, it's going through someone else's villages now, but that's not a violation of religious freedom. Okay. So yeah, the movement, religious freedom, I'd say indiscriminate killings is another one, lack of due process, cruel and unusual punishment, torture. There's a lot. There's a lot of allegations that are hurled at Israel, and I acknowledge some of those accusations are nothing more than vile anti-Semitic trash, but that's a pretty small percentage in my view. Most of it are legitimate grievances against the state of Israel for gross human rights violations. Palestinian Authority, to the extent that they are held to account, including the U.S. We ran a report on Palestine. We note all their violations as well, as does the UN and Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. They do it too, but it's not equal because one's a state and one isn't. So those are the big violations.
So where do people go to figure? Because this is the same. It's similar problem with Ukraine and Russia. It's just luckily that situation feels a little bit more clear, right? The biggest issue for me with the Israel-Palestine situation is it feels really hard to get a good finger on the information and to really figure out is what this person's saying legitimate? How much is the bias stretching? How much is propaganda? How do you kind of get heads or tails on things like
it's really
this?
sad. I think I disagree. It's not hard to know this part of the world. It's not hard to get good facts. It's not hard. But we live in an age of spin. We live in an age where truth is up for debate. Yeah. We live in an age of disinformation. We also are experiencing 7, 8 decades of a very consistent public diplomacy campaign on the part of Israelis and global Jewry, which suggests that Palestinians are not good and we are. There is also the legacy of World War II and the Holocaust. I think it still weighs on white majority Western nations. I think there's a lot of guilt and shame when those images came back. If you read diplomatic history for the US, you will read accounts from Truman about how guilty he feels and how we have to do something for them, even though these people were like the most anti-Semitic folks. So I don't think it is actually hard to figure out fact from fiction. The costs for speaking out, that's part of the issue, my friend, is Israel-Palestine's like OG cancel culture. Before there even was a term, your shit would get canceled if you spoke incorrectly on this issue. People have tried to cancel me. People have called me an anti-Semite for literally stating fact. But that's the world we live in, and you really feel it when it comes to Israel and Palestine, where like everything seems up for debate. Everyone assumes that you have an agenda. If you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite. Member of Congress, one of my former members of Congress, Pramila Jayapal, Indian American, thinks she's really, really good. Washington State, part of the Progressive Caucus. The day before the president of Israel came to speak to Congress, which was 2 days ago, Congresswoman Jamia Paul said Israel is a racist state. On the record, she said that. By the next day, so much pressure from her own friends, not Republicans, liberal, progressive Democrats like AOC or Jamal Bowman were like, you need to shut up. You need to go out there and walk that back, or else you're not going to get reelected because we're not going to help you. And so she had to go back there and be like, what I meant to say, I didn't really mean to say that. Yes, you did. You meant to call them a racist state. We all heard you. But it's such a polarized debate
Right.
that you will get sanctioned for saying such things, even if you are a member of the U.S. Congress, let alone a little old private citizen. So people are quite disincentivized not to learn about it, not to go into it. People dissuaded me, like, don't do this work. It's going to ruin your career. Do not ever work in Israel-Palestine. That's why people leave. They don't want to work this issue. It's a career killer. It's a career killer. To work on this issue will destroy your career in U.S. diplomatic circles if you stay on it too long. That's how like fixed the tension is. It's incredibly fraught, but the issues are quite clear. The solutions are quite clear, but there's no sufficient will. There's just no will. And, the U.S. cannot want it more than Israelis and Palestinians. They can't want peace more than them. They got to want it. And in the army, they say that beatings will continue until the morale improves, and the beatings are just continuing on both sides. They're just both pummeling each other with seemingly no end in sight. It's almost become, some people speak of it as ritualistic. The violence is a ritual. I can tell you exactly what will happen when something explodes on either side of the line. It's that ritualized violence. It's that de facto and traditional.
Do you think that Jewish people should be able to pray at Al-Aqsa, the mosque?
Do I believe Jews should be allowed into the Al-Aqsa Mosque? Yeah, but we better be careful about that one, and only like certain times.
Why?
Because
Like logistically?
the reality, and we've seen this, the
So you're
reality,
fine with them being there. Is it just like a safety issue, or are you like, I'm not sure if Jewish people should be in there?
as a human rights activist, as a person of faith, I believe like any person should be able to go to any religious space on the planet. But that's me. I'm not of that faith. For many, many years until 2000s, it was illegal. Israel said it was illegal for any Israeli to pray at the Temple Mount because they knew if Jews walk into that mosque on the wrong day at the wrong time, they might not leave. You know what I'm saying? Like, shit will pop off in those mosques, and now all of a sudden you got like a religious war in the mosque. This tension is not a religious tension, by the way. That's a myth. This conflict is not a religious conflict. It's never been a religious conflict. But outside observers will be like, what are you going to do? It's a religious conflict. They've been arguing for thousands of years. No, they haven't. This beef is a political beef. It's an economic beef. It's a national beef. The beef started when a state was created. Jews and Palestinians, they've been living there since Christ was a corporal. It's not religion. So yeah, they should be allowed. Israel said no until 2000 because it would probably start something really bad. Since 2000, Israel said, screw it, they should be allowed to pray up there. So when Jews go to pray, they go with armed escorts. Can you imagine the scene? A bunch of armed Israeli soldiers armed with US weapons in a mosque, locked and loaded, providing overwatch while Jews pray. Does that, like, can you imagine? Can you imagine bringing firearms into your temple? It would be unheard of. So yeah, you're allowed, but like, is it a good look? I think if it were up to me, I would do what Palestinians and Israelis did in the past, but they don't do anymore, which is coordinate access to faith spaces. So like, I used to do a lot of work in Jericho. Jericho is without a doubt part of Palestine. No one doubts Jericho is part of the Palestinian state.
How is
Jericho,
it? Sorry, can I ask? How is it not a religious war like at all? Like it feels like that would like since there's so many like central religious things going on there. How is this not a religious war?
if we're not careful, if they're not careful, it might turn into one. Look at the claims of both sides. What claims are religious and which ones are not?
And you would say dominantly the claims
Look
are
what each
about.
party wants. Like, what does each party want? Is any of it religious? The only thing that's religious is free and unfettered access to Jerusalem and to have Jerusalem as the united and undivided capital. Both want that. That's religious. Both countries believe Jerusalem is their capital, and it's because of religion, right? Because it's Jerusalem. But that solution is pretty easy. We've been doing that. East Jerusalem is for the Palestinians. West Jerusalem is for the Israelis. The Temple Mount, no one really owns it. Everyone gets to go. So, no, I don't think it's a religious war. Look at what they want. This tension was created out of nationalism, not religious fervor. Somebody created a state, the state of Israel. It's strange to hold all of these contradictions. The state of Israel is a modern, representative, parliamentary democracy that's Jewish. It's a lot. It's a lot of contradictions. Israel is a religious state. It is. They have religious parties that are pushing really hard. That's relatively new. They haven't had power. But these policies, these are civil policies. These are national policies. Israel is not seeking expansion by and large because of God. They're seeking expansion by and large because they need room to grow. Tiny ass country. They need room. That's why they're growing. It's not, some people in the government, more today than ever, are like, it's God's will. That's true. But they don't hold all the power. The people have held all the power. We need to expand because we have demographic pressures, not because God said so. Palestinians are trying to secure a territory, not because God said so. It's because they were promised a state and they want their state. Just like the Kurds. It's not a religious argument. That's a big myth in the West. I literally, no joke, had to go to graduate school and go in a massive debt to really learn and understand how this is a new conflict, and it is a political conflict, and an economic conflict, a racial conflict, an ethnic conflict that's tinged with religion. But religion is not driving this conflict, and it never really has. It's something a lot of listeners are not going to accept. And it's okay. That shows the power of the propaganda on all sides. It shows how little we actually know about that part of the world. And we have a hard time believing that Jews and Muslims can actually coexist. And they have. From year zero until the late 30s, they coexisted.
I think
So
my
what?
confusion is specifically because you said that Palestine is kind of like a secular group.
The
Uh,
government, the government of Palestine is a secular nation.
okay. And
Just
you also
yes,
talked, yeah, you also talked about like a lot of the Jewish people in Israel are going to be like culturally Jewish, but most of them are not religiously Jewish, right? It sounds like Judaism is not super like it's a common religion, but it's not like
yeah.
they're actively practicing it that way.
So if we ask the question, like, how religious is Israel proper? You know, gauging religiosity is tricky. The way we usually measure it is by like rates of attendance. How often do you go to temple? You know, how often you celebrate high holidays? And on that metric, Israelis are not going to temple as much as they used to. Israelis are not worshiping the holidays as they used to. There's a loosening up. If you go to Israel now on the Sabbath, 20 years ago, you walk down the street of Tel Aviv, Israel proper, Tel Aviv on a Friday night, you're not going to see anyone out there. They're all observing the Sabbath, all of them, like overwhelmingly. Now, you'd never know that Friday night was a high holy night in this country. There, people are out there partying and doing all their things.
So then
So
the
by so they are their religion, the religiosity of Israel is declining, which is what we always see in democracies. Religion always goes down in democracies.
Mhm.
The way it plays out publicly, it becomes more private.
Right. Okay.
And most Israelis, every poll shows 60 to 70% of Israelis do not support growing religiosity in their state. They don't think Orthodox Jews should be given an exemption from conscription. So if you're Orthodox, you don't have to serve in the army. A lot of Israelis don't like that. They don't think it's fair. The Haredi, that's the term used for Orthodox Jews in Israel, the Haredi get additional subsidies from the government. They're given priority for housing and settlements. They don't have to serve in the military. They get all these hookups, and it pisses off non-Haredi Israelis. It's really upsetting them, and they protest about it all the time. So, like, this is not a religious war. It's not a religious conflict.
So my confusion is if it's not a religious conflict, I understand what you're saying of like what the nascence of what it is, but then if we're also saying that Israel is like a highly religious state, these two things feel in conflict with each other. These two claims feel in conflict with each other.
Welcome to the Middle East, where contradictions abound, conflict abounds.
So
Israel has always
I
been
guess
Jewish.
my issue is these are your claims. So I'm trying to understand when you say that they are a religious state, Israel, that is, but also that the tensions with them between Palestine is not religious in nature. I'm struggling to make these 2 points
Right.
come together.
So this, in part, this is around like, what does it mean to be Jewish? So Israel as a state, by law, is a majority Jewish. Most people in the West, when I say Jewish, they assume Star of David and God. But that's not the truth. The truth of it is, for some, it's God. For others, it's culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's culture, it's dress, it's language, speaking modern Hebrew, it's having the foods and having the holidays. Maybe you go to temple a couple of times a year, but you don't like carry it like that. Israeli society has never been dominated by ultra religious conservatives until 2 years ago. So what the tension you are articulating, which is true, you're not crazy and I'm not crazy. You're being like, that's totally accurate. That has always been the tension.
Right.
But again, just because your state says it's a Jewish majority country, that doesn't mean every policy is religious. It doesn't mean every war is religious. It doesn't mean every issue you grapple. But now it's becoming that way because religious parties have captured power. They never did before. So now religious parties can force the government to look at this as a religious war. That's the danger. But up until a few years ago, it was a great and huge myth. Even though that's like saying the U.S. is a majority Christian nation, therefore every war we fight is a religious war. No, one does not follow the other necessarily,
Yeah.
right?
My understanding in Middle East is that like politics and religion get really hard to separate anyways, and that religion is like a really good banner to kind of champion under. And so I'm kind of hearing what you're saying of being like they might be championing more recently, particularly under a banner of religiosity because people can unify under that. But fundamentally, this is about land and this is about like national security and also like kind of like nationalism itself.
Yeah, fundamentally, the contest is over non-religious issues, fundamentally speaking. They're very rational, reasonable issues. Economic viability, peace and security, mutual trade, respect, an end to terrorism, an ability to move freely, the ability to worship freely. These are things everyone around the globe wants. It gets tinged with it because of that part of the world, because one actor is based off of one characteristic, being Jewish. The separation in politics and religion, right, in Islam, intentionally, there is no division, which doesn't make sense to many Western ears, especially if you're Christian or secular atheist. But in Southwest Asia, in most of the majority countries, there is no division. That's from Muhammad.
Yeah. It's
That's
a very, very political religion.
in
It's intrinsic to it.
or it's a religious politic. Like there's just no division. They're
Yeah.
one and the same in a traditional reading. They're one and the same within Islam.
Are you Muslim? You said
no.
you're of faith. Okay.
No, I was raised Jesuit. I was raised Catholic.
Yeah.
No, I don't even think I knew any Muslims growing up. I only knew Catholics and Jews. That's what I was raised with until I moved to LA. In Israeli politics, there is a strict division because it is a Western-style democracy, and Western-style democracies have a division. But since it is a majority Jewish state, they do allow for religious parties. The U.S. does not, right? We can't have a religious party, not overtly. We can't. In Israel, you can, not because there's no separation, because there is a separation. It's because it's a majority Jewish state. So, there's contradictions. If I were to push it, the contradictions are there because Israel doesn't fit the state system. It's an unusual state. It sticks out. It's the only one like this in the entire planet. So there's going to be tension, contradictions. It's not going to make sense because it doesn't make sense. It's a really unusual look. And it's here to stay. And no one's going to be able to destroy Israel except for Israelis, just like no one can destroy the U.S. except for its citizens, like January 6th style. So there is a contradiction. I grant that. There's a lot of resistance in the West around this idea that it's not a religious war. And it's not my opinion. This is like what people in the field, what we say is the truth. Like, it's not my little opinion. It's considered a fact that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not a religious conflict. It's a secular conflict tinged, sprinkled with religion, not the opposite. Mm-hmm. Just look at the asks. Look at what people want. And they're outside of Jerusalem, they're not religious asks. They're not saying convert or die. They're not saying pay a tax if you're not part of my faith. Only the people in the fringes are saying that.
Are Jewish people, do they live in any of these Palestinian kind of like dominant areas? Do they ever immigrate there and like become part of Palestine? It's not a nation, but like become part of Palestine?
I've met Jews and Israelis who live in Palestine. Very few. And the ones that I know or have heard of that live like on the open economy, like they live alongside Palestinians. I'm setting aside Jerusalem. But in it's called area, now we're getting in the weeds. There's area A, B, and C. That was set up on the Oslo Peace Accords. Area A are areas of the West Bank and Gaza where the Palestinians are supposed to have complete control. Area B is shared control. Area C is disputed. Jerusalem is disputed Area C. Mm-hmm. Jericho, for instance, is Area A. It's supposed to be fully run by the Palestinians. Same with Jenin. Mm-hmm. That's a fully autonomous Palestinian area. So if we want to play the nation state, game. What Israel did 2 weeks ago going to Jenin is an act of war. You violated the sovereign territory of another nation. So if we want to play that game, Israel just committed a gross violation of the norms of war, just like Saddam Hussein did when he went to Kuwait. Same. So in Area A, you find some Jews and Israelis who live there on the open. What you tend to see is they live in Area B, where there's more mixing. The challenge, the problem, the thing that really perpetuates violence are these goddamn settlement outposts. So you'll have a town like Jenin. It's like 50, 60,000 Palestinians. And then the best land, the best territory, again, this is Palestine. No one debates that this is Palestine unless you're on the fringe. It is Palestine. It's not even an argument. 60,000 Palestinians will be this one little hill, and there'll be a couple of hundred Israeli settlers, economic settlers, not religious settlers. The government is paying them money, 30 grand a year and a house, to live out there, to create a fact on the ground. Then they surround those settlers with hundreds, maybe thousands of Israeli soldiers to make sure they're safe. And then they surround it with wire and they build roads that just the Israelis can drive down. They're called settlement roads. That, I'd argue, that is the number one issue of concern. That's the number one thing that triggers a terror response, are these settlement outposts. Even the US has said, like, they're illegal, they're not helping. Everyone agrees that it's a bad idea to plop down 100 Israelis in the middle of a 60,000 person Palestinian town and then give them the army. That's what you see more than just random Israelis and Jews living alongside Palestinians in area A and B. If they do, chances are they're probably lefties or refuseniks, meaning Israelis who refuse to go along with their government. They're called refuseniks. And refuseniks will often live alongside Palestinians. But usually...
Will the Palestinians allow them? Like, is there any tension there?
I mean, they can't say yes or no because they don't have any power, so...
Well, yeah, I don't mean, like, legally, though. I mean, like, how do the people
Oh, like,
respond? Yeah, like, does Hamas get upset with these people? Would they want to kick them out? Is there
Oh,
violence
not
done to these
in
people?
Gaza, so Hamas doesn't have a say. I doubt there are any Jews or Israelis outside of social service organizations in Gaza. There are no Jews in Gaza, and that's where Hamas is.
Right.
The West Bank is where there's more mixing and more integration. And this gets back to this isn't a religious war, because I have experienced, history have shown that Jews and Muslims have lived together for thousands of years with no problems in this part of the world. And so if you go to Jerusalem, it can really shock you, like culture shock, to see in the midst of what we perceive is a religious war, Jews and Muslims praying together in Jerusalem, marrying each other's family, hanging out. It's totally common, totally common. The more you get outside Jerusalem, the less you see that. But I think, in my experience, there is always a surprising amount of tolerance and acceptance both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have to be together. These people, most citizens know, like, we're cousins. We got no choice. We have to work together. It's the same God. We have to live together. The religious beef, I didn't believe it either until I lived there. And then I lived there off and on for years. And I saw, no, this is about politics, economics, which is good. I don't want it to be about God. You can never solve that.
So, it sounds like IDF does remove settlements to, like, try to, like, disengage a little bit. Like, is that what happened? So, like, I know the Gaza Strip settlements were removed in 2005.
All the settlements are gone.
Okay.
To be fair, they weren't very big. So settlement is a misnomer. When I first heard the term, I envisioned a bunch of trailers. No, settlements are full-on towns. Think of, like, developments in the American Southwest, like Phoenix, just gated communities, instant towns, the exurbs. That's what a settlement is. 30, 40, 50, 100,000 people in a settlement. There are also settlements, the way they start is with the trailers. And you, if you're the Israeli government, you pay people to hold it down, to be the pioneer. And those are just random trailers, but eventually it builds and builds and builds and becomes a full-blown city, basically.
But to focus in on the question, it sounds like Israel has tried to pull the back, at least out of like Gaza, completely to disengage. Did that lead to like any fruit on the Palestinian side, or like any easing of tensions?
I think it's fair to say there's an easing of tensions in Gaza until recently. You know, this last year has been kind of wild,
What initiated the last year to like blow up again?
so to speak. Now this
Or literally,
one,
sounds like
now
literally
this
too.
one is a little is probably mostly my opinion. I think the reason why things have gotten like even for Israel and Palestine, things have gotten crazy this past year is what's going on domestically in Israel and how that relates to what's going on around the globe. Just this rise in ethno-nationalism and ultra-right politics are kind of in style. So a whole new government swept into power in Israel like we've never seen before. And anyone who thinks they've seen, a really extreme government in Israel, like this really is an extreme government. Like most Israelis agree with me on this one. Like 73% believe this government is really, really bad for like everyone. I think that was a big piece of it. There is a cycle. I said it was ritualized, and the cycle goes something happens, somebody fires a rocket or somebody gets killed, Israel goes in hard, Palestine responds, then things calm down, and both sides learn, rearm, re-equip, and they go at it again. Last year was the start of that, like, let's go at it again from the last time, which was Israel went into Gaza, I don't want to say 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if they had a real reason. They just went in. I think it was to demonstrate that this new government was serious, the government that was trying to get elected. And they went in there and they just went crazy in Gaza. So they go back in too. But yes, they disengaged from Gaza. Did life improve for Palestinians? No, it got worse because they redeployed and they created a security net around Gaza. And so nothing in, nothing out. It's an open air jail with a terrorist organization trying to govern. They can't govern. They don't know what they're doing. I like that. I like that Palestinians, the one good thing I liked about what happened in Gaza after the elections of 2000 is that Palestinians get to see firsthand that these people who say they're all about God, they can't take care of you. They're actually not good at governing.
Like the
Maybe,
religious extremists.
yeah, Hamas. Like they're not good at governing, so maybe you don't love them so much because they're not delivering for you. That was the hope some of us had.
Right.
Things have not gotten better for Gaza. I think they've gotten better for Israel. I think Israel has ended up kind of a winner in that deal, in that last year aside, there has not been a lot of violence coming from Israel's southern flank. It's not neutralized, but it's been pretty quiet down there until fairly recently. That's a big win for Israel, huge win.
Right.
And they can take those troops and redeploy them. I suspect if I was living in Gaza and I had several years of Israelis of the IDF not coming in, that would probably be pretty amazing.
Right.
But I just see them over the horizon and they're strangling Gaza. But yes, Israel, not in the aggregate. In the aggregate, settlements have gone up. But yeah, it's fair and accurate to say that from time to time, Israel does pull back. They do deconstruct only to construct in another area. Right. So if you look at the measurement is a dunam. A dunam is a couple of acres. That's what they use. By dunams, Israeli settlements have increased like eightfold the past 20 years with no end in sight. I think most people believe settlements are the number one reason why there's no peace. It's not religion. It's not the rockets. It's not the racism. It's not 9/11. It's not the maps or the Brits or the wars. It's the fucking settlements.
It's land.
Pretty much everyone agrees that's the problem, are the settlements. 90% of settlements are secular economic settlers. like 5 to 10% are hardcore religious zealots that believe God told them to take their family to this hill and live here. They are there, but there's not many of them. They're
Okay.
mostly secular people getting a paycheck to go out there and risk their lives for the state. The settlements are the biggest. This is the official US position as well. This is the official NATO, EU, Arab League. Everyone except the Israelis on the planet officially says that settlements are the greatest deterrent to a lasting peace process. And I agree. And if the settlements are not going to end, then the crisis is not going to end.
Right. Okay. Somebody just sent me this. It sounds like the recent Gaza conflict might have been initiated by Israel carried out several airstrikes on Gaza, including Jabalia, in response to 4 rockets fired from the enclave. 2 of the rockets were shot down by the Iron Dome air defense system, and 2 landed in uninhabited areas. No injuries were reported on either side. I'm not sure if you can.
That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Just trying to
That's
fact check all this stuff because it's so hard to stay on
the
top of all.
standard cycle.
Yeah. It's
That's
just like
pretty.
another loop.
That's pretty standard.
Okay, so you're saying the government is like paying these people to move out. Are they?
My kid needs to eat some food.
Oh, yeah, for sure. One person was wondering if they could come on and ask you some questions. I think they have kind of differing views, and it sounds like they know more. Do you have time for that? And if you'd rather not, I understand. But
Well, 10 minutes. I wasn't sure how long we were going for today. I didn't clarify that with you. And
nope, no worries.
yeah.
You've got 10 minutes. Okay, I'll see if they want to come on. Okay, the person, it's Ari Yelian. If you want to come on, you need to DM me, and I'll add you to the group call. Oh, okay. He had a lot of big talk, but now he doesn't want to come on, I guess. Oh, he'll come. Okay, he'll come.
Well, very strong views on Israel Palestine.
They do.
There's
Yes.
never any
I'm
lack.
quite agnostic. I really don't know what to think. I'm
Yeah.
very much of the view that if I don't understand something, I do my best to like not weigh in strongly with an opinion. So I'm pretty like agnostic as far as just being like, just like tell me what's going on, because I'm just sad enough to have an opinion on this stuff. Okay. Just give me 1 second. He's gonna have to, we're friends. This guy's gonna need to just add me as a friend, and then I can add him into this call. So it'll be like a pause while I call him, and then we'll pop back in. Is there anything that while we're waiting, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think people should know?
Gosh, we've covered a lot of ground. Whew. No, I think we've covered a lot. There's certainly always more one could talk about, whether it's like, can the U.S. be an even-handed facilitator? I think watching Israel the next year or so is going to be fascinating. There's just so many changes in Israel right now that a lot of folks are just not really paying attention to. And usually when something happens when Israel does something in Palestine, it usually has more to do with what's going on within Israel than it does Palestine. That's a little inside dope. Usually, it's part of the ritual when something blows up in Gaza, when Israel does a military operation. Chances are there's something really big going on domestically, and there are people in the government who want to distract the population. And it's a very effective way to distract Israeli citizens is by talking about Palestine and Iran.
Okay. All right. I'm going to add this person to the call, which means we're going to end, and then you need to accept a new call. That's how Discord works with this. Okay. Okay, so how I'm gonna manage this is because I don't have like superpowers over everyone. I just want to make sure that we're being super respectful of Aaron's time. So feel free to like ask your questions and bring up some of your concerns, but try not to like talk over our guest or anything like that.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
I can. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I don't know much about you. I just came in, just hoping to learn more about you. Couldn't get much information. I came in a bit pretty hot, maybe because I'm just a bit hyper vigilant. But I think you're not the worst person I've ever seen on the issue. You're pretty good in some ways, but I think you're a bit doomer on the conflict, which is kind of leading to the polarization that we're continuing to see. How long has it been? I guess how long has it been since you believed in the peace process again?
Did you say it was a doomer? Is that the word, or
Yeah.
Well, you
boomer?
said you're against the two-state process, which
I
is
didn't say I'm
pretty much
against it. I just don't think it's going to happen. I'm not
okay.
against.
So you just don't think it's reasonable, like a realistic thing that's going to happen, which is kind of doomery in my mind, but I think it's still reasonably
It was
possible.
it was doomer. All right. Yeah, I do not believe the two-state solution right now is a viable, realistic option for anyone, Palestinian or Israeli. There literally is no agreement on the table. There's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to process. So yeah, I think
Do you
it's.
know about
I
the
think it's dead.
2000?
I think it's dead. I think the two-state solution is dead. Maybe it can be revived, but I do believe it's dead. I have been a two-state solution person since the 90s. I lost hope in the two-state solution. I don't know. Somewhere around like 2010, 2012, I started to
Okay.
lose faith in the two-state solution.
Who do you think around that time was like your leader of choice around that time?
My leader in like Israel?
Oh no, like around that time, who do you think could bring in like who was that person that you thought was the person that would bring in peace around that time, 2010, 2012?
Oh, I don't think there's any one person that could bring about peace, but I did see that there was a pathway, aka the roadmap, is what it's referred to as. There was a roadmap that talked about settlements, final status of Jerusalem, all the things we've been talking about for the last 2.5 hours. The
Yeah.
roadmap wasn't perfect, but I thought, okay, this roadmap, which the roadmap was overseen by 5 parties: the US, the EU, Russia, and part of the Arab League. And collectively, I had some confidence in the early 2000s into the mid 2000s that the roadmap actually might work. The roadmap to a two-state solution. And then when the roadmap fell apart, I didn't see anyone or anything else able to do the lift to bring it in. So I never
Yeah.
was like this guy or this woman was going to be able to do it, but I thought there was enough momentum, enough intention, there was enough peace, there was enough period where people were not firing back and forth, unlike now, where I thought maybe we can help get a deal done. And I just don't think that's likely right now. I'm not against it. I literally, brother, pray for a two-state solution, okay? I believe that is what both communities deserve. I just don't see a way forward right now.
Do you think that there is a crisis of leadership?
On both sides. Oh, sorry, all sides. I think that's an easy question.
Yeah.
I think the Israelis suffer from bad leadership. The Palestinians are almost genetically fucking encoded to have poor leadership.
Would you support Marwan Barghouti, I guess? Is that your choice right
I
now?
mean, these are not my people, right? I'm not Palestinian.
Okay.
I don't have a say in such things. I'm an American citizen. Marwan Barghouti and like people like what's that dude's name? Race for Haaretz, Bashara. Yeah, they have some moderating tendencies. I don't think they'd be really good in governance. I don't think academics and advocates on the Palestinian side have ever shown themselves to be pretty effective at being a leader. I think the Palestinian bench is really thin. To be fair, there's not a lot around. People are getting killed. People are leaving. There's not much of a functioning government, unlike Israel. It has a proper functioning government.
Would you say
Yeah,
the last
I think
the last
everyone has been failed by their leadership, my friend.
would you say the last chance at a peaceful leader was probably Marwan Barghouti about 20 years ago?
Maybe. I mean, he had blood in his hands. It's interesting to hear that because he's done a lot of nasty things.
Yeah.
Personally, when Abu Mazen was
If you think
elected,
about it, a Mandela type of situation, do you think he
oh, it
could
would
be?
be really sweet to see a Mandela type figure on either side emerge. I
Yes.
actually was a big fan of Shimon Peres when he was out of office and when he was the president of Israel, President Peres. I thought there was a moment where he kind of walked a nice moderate middle line. I thought he showed some pretty strong leadership. It was so strong that Israelis started hating him for it. But yeah, I can't really pick any leaders on either side. They're
Yeah,
both
there has to be
doing
more
very poorly.
leaders on the Palestinian side to choose from before the peace chance starts happening. Because I don't think there are any that you can name right now.
The one that I like, he's been in and out. He served as a technocrat. His name is Khalil Shikaki. He currently runs a research think tank in the West Bank. And Khalil, he was a parliamentarian. Someone like him, I thought that's that Mandela type.
I've never heard about him, but I'll look. I
Yeah,
see
Khalil
his thing right now.
is
Like
SHI.
SHIQAQI, something like that.
Shikaki, SHIKAKI.
Oh, okay, I got it
That's
with
the
the Q's here.
Anglicized way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I got it on his
He
Twitter.
studies
Yeah.
with Marwan Barghouti as well, though Khalil has never been in jail. He's an academic. He's
So
never.
he's a possibility here. Does he
Yeah.
want to run for politics, or does he have
He has said he wants to run again, but they haven't had elections since 2005. So
Oh, that's good.
he's not a
Shout him
big
out.
fan of the Palestinian government.
We need more names like him being talked about.
Yeah, him I like. I think he's a good. Diana Buttu is another person I like on the Palestinian side. She used to be the spokesperson for the Palestinian Negotiation Support Unit. They're negotiators. She's a lawyer, American Palestinian citizen. I think she's pretty amazing. She's held a seat before. It's really hard as a woman to get elected into the Palestinian Authority, and she's a pretty strong voice. There is a woman. I think she just passed away. Hanan Ashrawi. Is she still? Do you know that name? She's old school.
I think so. I kind of vaguely remember it from here and there, but
Like Edward
I don't
Said.
have. I'm not like whatchamacallit. I don't claim to be like a super expert. Not like I haven't gone through like school and stuff. I just know a bit. I just
She's still alive. I love her. She has been a Nobel Peace. She didn't win it. She was a laureate. She got put in for it.
Yeah, these are the things that
She
we're missing
has
from
held-
this dialogue is more names that are going to be kind of like the next Nelson Mandela, kind of bring a peaceful kind of situation out of the conflict. Because
I
there's
love how you speak, and I literally nourish a hope and pray that these voices are coming up.
they're totally minimized in the conflict.
Timing's a big deal in this part of the world, and I just, even if there was that Israeli, Jewish, or Palestinian Muslim Mandela, even if they were there, I fear that person would be listened to, that person be killed, that person be canceled. There's just not a lot of room right now in the middle. There's just not, unfortunately.
That's why Netanyahu's in charge, is because there's a vacuum right now, and that's why he's able to do what he does so easily. And it is a bad faith thing, but he is. I don't think he's as he has the lowest chance of making a peace, deal on that side, because if you look at any of the left wingers, they probably jump at it, but he's a bit more bad faith, obviously.
100. And he's back, right? This is his third time as the prime minister, and every time he comes in, it gets worse for Israelis and Palestinians.
He's the Israeli Trump in my mind, yeah.
I think he's kind of worse because he's actually really clever and smart. He gets shit done. I think he was a buffoon.
Yeah, if Trump was smart and actually served in the army, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, Bibi is old school, and when in doubt, I'm going to be very general. When Israeli citizens feel fearful, they're going to elect a man like that every single time. And I don't think they're weird for doing that or unusual. I think many of us will run. I think Bush, the son, right? He did very well after 9/11. Because many Americans were just so scared, they gave him all of our rights, right? But Bibi, every time Bibi comes into office, it's usually because there's a crisis point, and then he usually makes it worse for Israel.
Because what happens is the bad faith corrupt politicians usually like to use the extremists when there's close to a peace talk. They like to, because they wouldn't be in power if there was.
He knows what's up. That's literally what I said. That it's domestic. That they're.
It works on both sides, but like obviously, whatchamacallit, that guy who killed Yitzhak Rabin, obviously, that was Netanyahu's whatchamacallit. When you kind of incite somebody to do something? I can't remember what the word is. Yeah.
Right.
He basically says you're gonna lose. You're gonna, if you don't fight for your country, you're gonna lose it, type of thing. And then obviously,
Bibi is a bad actor, and as soon as he came into office, I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's going to be a really bloody and violent period." And what's more is like his own people are trying to hold him to account, right? Like he's facing trial, he's facing protests. They withdrew the judiciary reform bill because Bibi knows he's losing power. He's scared.
The reform is really unpopular, and I think he knows that it's not gonna hold in the society that when most people are against it.
Right, but
because we are still, not we, but like they are still a democracy. I'm Jewish, but I'm not.
I mean, technically, they're a democracy. I think there are some really big challenges to democracy, and I think Israelis realize it over the judiciary. I've always had concerns about Israeli democracy, but these days I really worry about Israeli democracy, and I want there to be a democracy in that part of the world. I think Israel's neighbors would do well to have a real functioning democracy in that part of the world, and it's been a tough road for democracy in Israel. It's been a really tough road, and I'll be honest, I'm surprised to see the resistance on the streets by Israelis. I've never seen it in my life. I've never seen it.
I could have called it. Yeah.
Well,
I pretty much was saying this shit before. I said Israel is too much of a democracy, too much like a, it wants a democracy too much to go to totalitarianism, authoritarianism. So they're gonna protest, and that's the biggest sign of a robust democracy is the protest.
So if you were to bet, would you bet these reforms pass or no?
I think the only reason why he's trying to do the reform right now is because it's what the religious Zionists want, and if they don't get it, they're gonna basically pull their support, and he's gonna lose his coalition. Thus he's gonna lose power. It's like a power game.
And so you believe that he actually will push them through?
As long as the religious Zionists are gonna be the only ones keeping him in power, yeah.
Completely agree.
He's gonna try to do it. It's politics for him. He wants power, and he
loses his coalition, which means since it's a parliament, they have new elections, and then he'll lose his power probably.
I don't think he's a religious Zionist, but I think
he's not.
The same thing Trump is doing with QAnon. I don't think Trump believes in all that stuff. I think he just use it to his advantage.
I actually think Bibi's an atheist. No, he just uses it. He uses religion very, very well. He's really astute at pulling the strings. Yeah, he's in a tough place. I think he's trying to find a way out without losing his coalition, but advancing some amount of reforms to save face. But I have been surprised at the pushback from civilians, not the military. Pleasantly surprised. And yeah, to your point, it does show that
Israeli movements are not anything without great leaders, so we need good leaders.
Israeli democracy might be stronger than a lot of observers gave her credit for. Like that, we'll see. But it is possible that Israelis are going to show what their democracy really is under this Bibi, which to me that's very exciting. I would really like to see that. I love the state of Israel. I want for it to be a raving success. I love Palestine as well. I want it to be a raving success. I've lived.
Don't you then believe in two-state position?
I want it. I believe it. I just don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I think the time.
You said it's not realistic in this time frame. So obviously you.
I do.
We need to fix that. We need to fix that.
I do want it. Yeah, from your lips to God's ears, I I think the two-state solution is the only way to guarantee sustainable peace. Like any other solution, it's not going to be sustainable or peaceful. It's like a sugar high. So the two-state to me is the answer, but no one, including the US, seems ready for it. It just doesn't seem to be the time right now. And as you probably know, there's this weird cyclical time thing in Israel and Palestine. And anyone who's selling two-state right now, no one's really buying it. It breaks my heart, man, as someone who
I mean, I can get into more like heated topics, but I mean, this is good, I guess, for a start.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, I appreciate that you came in and it was a really good faith
Wow.
conversation despite the.
What was her name? I'm sorry, I forgot it when Erudite shared it.
His Discord name is CDN. I don't know if he wants to go by anything.
Oh,
other than
okay. I
CDN,
didn't see the link. Thank you, CDN, for rolling in here.
I've talked to a few people like Lonerbox and like a few other people I can name, but yeah,
Oh, I think the
Smugbug.
person diplomacy is something that's been missing, and something that I think we need more of is more non-Israelis and Palestinians talking about Israel and Palestine and really trying to connect like you and I are doing, even though we might have big differences. I think we can agree on some core things. And I think when we start talking as citizens and individuals and humans, I think maybe it can help because there's just a lot of bad info out there. Right?
There needs to be more good faith places for dialogue. I agree.
I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. Like, I am a fan of that dual narrative approach and honoring. You don't have to accept these narratives. You don't have to like support them, but can we hold them? Can we hold that both, have legitimate claims? There is a way that both these communities can live in peace and security.
Yeah.
I do believe that. I think this is just like a lull.
Yeah. I
This is
wanted
the
to
lull
bring
part of it.
CDN on specifically because even though you were being a little spicy at times, you did seem very informed. And so I felt like if anyone was going to offer kind of like the counter position who's informed, I was hoping that it would be you. So I appreciate you coming on, regardless of like you getting, I think you got timed out like once or twice. So I appreciate you sticking around and being willing to pop by.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah,
I live to talk, have these conversations. So
I really need to put on my father hat and go take care of my kiddo.
Absolutely. Thanks for stopping by.
This has been just terrific. I appreciate you so much, Erudite, for being curious, for taking this up, and it's been really fun.
Yeah. I appreciate you kind of informing me and talking to me and giving me 2.5 hours of your life.
Right on. Good time. Peace. Have a great
Have a good
weekend.
one. Yeah.
Take care, CDN.
have a good one.
Okay. Thanks, CDN, for stopping by.
Kick me.
Okay.
Kick
Bye.
me.
Okay. Hello. Oh my gosh. What a good angle. All right. Good job, everyone. We made it. Hey, if you like the channel, if you want to support it, you're curious, you want to learn more, as much as I get like a lot of flack on the internet, which is not me being like I'm special, it's because I'm an internet person. For those of you who are newer to my channel and not as familiar, I really, really, really want to try to do my best to like learn and understand the world around me. And I'm always very open that geopolitics is extremely complicated, and I wish people would talk less about it as far as like uninformed opinions and asked more questions. So if you were like upset that I wasn't pushing back on areas where you felt that I should have or anything like that, that's really not the role that I think is my place to occupy as somebody who's like pretty modestly informed on complex Middle Eastern conflict. So if you enjoy my stuff, you want to support it, you want to see more of this, please do consider subscribing, giving me your Amazon Prime, which is free every month but doesn't auto-renew. If you're watching on YouTube, you can do the same thing. If you're watching me on Kick, we're just starting to take off. We're a little bit quiet on the sub side, so if you're watching on Kick and you want to throw me a sub, I'd super appreciate that. I get like 90% of the income, so it's excellent. And of course, you can also join my Patreon. I will be doing a Patreon call-in show this Sunday, so if you're interested in having like a 45-minute conversation, they're very different than like most of my normal content. They're more like talking about life and philosophy and like what we think about the world. Some people will talk about like interpersonal issues that they're having in like kind of a vague way to be like, what do you think I should do? And kind of process how they think about situations and themselves. Please join me there. It's any Patreon level will give you access to it. You just have to email me and let me know what you want to talk about. There's a little bit of vetting that I have to do for like safety reasons, but yeah, if you'd like to support me there, Patreon is also a really great way, and you also get free puppy videos every month, so kind of amazing. Yeah. How do people know nothing about a conflict, read no history, and then talk shit? Welcome to politics. Nobody ever knows anything. So I think that'll probably be my show for today. Things are pretty quiet, and it gives me an opportunity to finish some schooling that I was working on before I started this. So I'm going to send you guys off. Twitch, is there a location you would like to be sent to, my dear friends? You have a couple of options. Maybe I'll send you to Linus Tech. Linus Tech. Okay, I was memorizing how to type it. I'm going to send you guys to Linus Tech. You can head over there. Have a good one, guys. Thank you so much. And as always, big hugs, big kisses. Think well. Have a good evening, or a good afternoon, and a good life. Off you go. YouTube. I think Reddit r/space is still going on, so I might send you to Destiny. Yep. Here you go. Off you go. Kick. I have nowhere for you to go. Oh, you guys can go to Destiny too. Okay. I typed it wrong. All right, off you go. Destiny's there again. They're killing a dog, so have fun. And I might see you there.